Section 31 of The Fortunes of Nigel by Sir Walter Scott. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 29. How fares the man on whom good men would look with eyes where scorn and censure combated? But that kind Christian love hath taught the lesson, that they who merit most contempt and hate do most deserve our pity. Old Play. It might have seemed natural that the visit of John Christie should have entirely diverted Nigel's attention from his slumbering companion, and for a time such was the immediate effect of the chain of new ideas which the incident introduced. Yet soon after the injured man had departed, Lord Glenvarloch began to think it extraordinary that the boy should have slept so soundly while they talked loudly in his vicinity. Yet he certainly did not appear to have stirred. Was he well? Was he only feigning sleep? He went close to him to make his observations, and perceived that he had wept, and was still weeping, though his eyes were closed. He touched him gently on the shoulder. The boy shrunk from his touch, but did not awake. He pulled him harder, and asked him if he was sleeping. "Do they waken folk in your country to know whether they are asleep or no?" said the boy, in a peevish tone. "No, my young sir," answered Nigel, "but when they weep in the manner you do in your sleep, they awaken them to see what ails them." "It signifies little to any one what ails me," said the boy. "True," replied Lord Glenvarloch, "but you knew before you went to sleep how little I could assist you in your difficulties, and you seemed disposed, notwithstanding, to put some confidence in me." "If I did, I have changed my mind," said the lad. "And what may have occasioned this change of mind, I trow?" said Lord Glenvarloch. "Some men speak through their sleep. Perhaps you have the gift of hearing in it." "No, but the patriarch Joseph never dreamt truer dreams than I do." "Indeed," said Lord Glenvarloch. "And pray what dream have you had that has deprived me of your good opinion? For that, I think, seems the moral of the matter." "You shall judge yourself," answered the boy. "I dreamed I was in a wild forest, where there was a cry of hounds and winding of horns, exactly as I heard in Greenwich Park." "That was because you were in the park this morning, you simple child," said Nigel. "Stay, my lord," said the youth. "I went on in my dream, till at the top of a broad green alley I saw a noble stag, which had fallen into the toils, and methought I knew that he was the very stag which the whole party were hunting, and that if the chase came up, the dogs would tear him to pieces, or the hunters would cut his throat, and I had pity on the gallant stag, and though I was of a different kind from him, and though I was somewhat afraid of him, I thought I would venture something to free so stately a creature, and I pulled out my knife, and just as I was beginning to cut the meshes of the net, the animal started up in my face, in the likeness of a tiger, much larger and fiercer than any you may have seen in the ward of the wild beasts yonder, and was just about to tear me limb from limb, when you awaked me." "Methinks," said Nigel, "I deserve more thanks than I have got, for rescuing you from such a danger by waking you. But, my pretty master, methinks all this tale of a tiger and a stag has little to do with your change of temper towards me." "I know not whether it has or no," said the lad, "but I will not tell you who I am." "You will keep your secret to yourself, then, peevish boy," said Nigel, turning from him and resuming his walk through the room. Then stopping suddenly, he said, "And yet you shall not escape from me without knowing that I penetrate your mystery." "My mystery," said the youth, at once alarmed and irritated. "What mean you, my lord?" "Only that I can read your dream without the assistance of a Chaldean interpreter, and my exposition is, that my fair companion does not wear the dress of her sex." "And if I do not, my lord," said his companion, hastily starting up and folding her cloak tight around her, "my dress, such as it is, covers one who will not disgrace it." "Many would call that speech a fair challenge," said Lord Glenvarloch, looking on her fixedly. "Women do not masquerade in men's clothes to make use of men's weapons." "I have no such purpose," said the seeming boy. "I have other means of protection, and powerful, but I would first know what is your purpose." "An honourable and a most respectful one," said Lord Glenvarloch. "Whatever you are, whatever motive may have brought you into this ambiguous situation, I am sensible every look, word, and action of yours makes me sensible that you are no proper subject of importunity, far less of ill usage. What circumstances can have forced you into so doubtful a situation, I know not, but I feel assured that there is and can be nothing in them of premeditated wrong which should expose you to cold-blooded insult. From me you have nothing to dread. I expected nothing less from your nobleness, my lord, answered the female. My adventure, though I feel it was both desperate and foolish, is not so very foolish, nor my safety here so utterly unprotected as at first sight, and in this strange dress, it may appear to be. I've suffered enough and more than enough by the degradation of having been seen in this unfeminine attire, and the comments you must necessarily have made on my conduct, but I thank God that I am so far protected, that I could not have been subjected to insult unavenged. When this extraordinary explanation had proceeded thus far, the warder appeared to place before Lord Glenvarloch a meal, which for his present situation might be called comfortable, and which, if not equal to the cookery of the celebrated Chevalier Beaujeu, was much superior in neatness and cleanliness to that of Alsatia. A warder attended to do the honours of the table, and made a sign to the disguised female to rise and assist him in his functions, but Nigel, declaring that he knew the youth's parents, interfered and caused his companion to eat along with him. She consented with a sort of embarrassment, which rendered her pretty features yet more interesting, yet she maintained with a natural grace that sort of good breeding which belongs to the table, and it seemed to Nigel, whether already prejudiced in her favour by the extraordinary circumstances of their meeting, or whether really judging from what was actually the fact, that he had seldom seen a young person comport herself with more decorous propriety mixed with ingenuous simplicity, while the consciousness of the peculiarity of her situation threw a singular colouring over her whole demeanour, which could be neither said to be formal, nor easy, nor embarrassed, but was compounded of and shaded with an interchange of all these three characteristics. Wine was placed on the table, of which she could not be prevailed on to taste a glass. Their conversation was of course limited by the presence of the warder to the business of the table, but Nigel had, long ere the cloth was removed, formed the resolution, if possible, of making himself master of this young person's history, the more especially as he now began to think that the tones of her voice and her features were not so strange to him as he had originally supposed. This, however, was a conviction which he adopted slowly, and only as it dawned upon him from particular circumstances during the course of the repast. At length the prison meal was finished, and Lord Glenvarloch began to think how he might most easily enter upon the topic he meditated, when the warder announced a visitor. "So," said Nigel, something displeased, "I find even a prison does not save one from importunate visitations." He prepared to receive his guest, however, while his alarmed companion flew to the large cradle-shaped chair which had first served her as a place of refuge, drew her cloak around her, and disposed herself as much as she could to avoid observation. She had scarce made her arrangements for that purpose when the door opened, and the worthy citizen George Heriot entered the prison chamber. He cast around the apartment his usual sharp, quick glance of observation, and advancing to Nigel, said, "My lord, I wish I could say I was happy to see you. The sight of those who are unhappy themselves, Master Heriot, seldom produces happiness to their friends. I, however, am glad to see you." He extended his hand, but Heriot bowed with much formal complaisance, instead of accepting the courtesy which, in those times when the distinction of ranks was much guarded by etiquette and ceremony, was considered as a distinguished favour. "You are displeased with me, Master Heriot," said Lord Glenvarloch, reddening, for he was not deceived by the worthy citizen's affectation of extreme reverence and respect. "By no means, my lord," replied Heriot, "but I have been in France, and have thought it is well to import, along with other more substantial articles, a small sample of that good breeding which the French are so renowned for." "It is not kind of you," said Nigel, "to bestow the first use of it on an old and obliged friend." Heriot only answered to this observation with a short dry cough, and then proceeded, "Hem, hem, I say ahem, my lord, as my French politeness may not carry me far. I would willingly know whether I am to speak as a friend, since your lordship is pleased to term me such, or whether I am, as befits my condition, to confine myself to the needful business which must be treated of between us." Speak as a friend by all means, Master Harriet, said Nigel. I perceive you have adopted some of the numerous prejudices against me, if not all of them. Speak out, and frankly, what I cannot deny, I will at least confess. And I trust, my lord, redress, said Harriet. So far as in my power, certainly, answered Nigel. Ah, ay, my lord, continued Harriet, that is a melancholy, though a necessary restriction. For how lightly may any one do 100 times more than the degree of evil which it may be within his power to repair to the sufferers and to society. But we are not alone here, he said, stopping and darting his shrewd eye towards the muffled figure of the disguised maiden, whose utmost efforts had not enabled her so to adjust her position as altogether to escape observation, more anxious to prevent her being discovered than to keep his own affairs private. Nigel hastily answered, "'Tis a page of mine. You may speak freely before him. He is of France, and knows no English." "I am, then, to speak freely," said Harry, after a second glance at the chair. "Perhaps my words may be more free than welcome." "Go on, sir," said Nigel. "I've told you I can bear reproof." "In one word, then, my lord, why do I find you in this place, and whelmed with charges which must blacken a name rendered famous by ages of virtue?" "Simply, then, you find me here," said Nigel, "because, to begin from my original error, I would be wiser than my father." "It was a difficult task, my lord," replied Harriet. "Your father was voiced generally as the wisest and one of the bravest men of Scotland. He commanded me," continued Nigel, "to avoid all gambling, and I took upon me to modify this injunction into regulating my play according to my skill, means, and the course of my luck." "I, self-opinion, acting on a desire of acquisition, my lord. You hope to touch pitch and not to be defiled," answered Harriet. "Well, my lord, you need not say, for I have heard with much regret how far this conduct diminished your reputation. Your next error I may without scruple remind you of, my lord, in whatever degree Lord Dalgarno may have failed towards you, the son of his father should have been sacred from your violence. You speak in cold blood, Master Harriet, and I was smarting under 1,000 wrongs inflicted on me under the mask of friendship. That is, he gave your lordship bad advice, and you," said Harriet. "Was fool enough to follow his counsel," answered Nigel. "But we will pass this, Master Harriet, if you please. Old men and young men, men of the sword and men of peaceful occupation, always have thought, always will think differently on such subjects." "I grant," answered Harriet, "the distinction between the old goldsmith and the young nobleman. Still you should have had patience for Lord Huntingdon's sake, and prudence for your own. Supposing your quarrel just—" "I pray you to pass on to some other charge," said Lord Glenvarloch. "I'm not your accuser, my lord, but I trust in heaven that your own heart has already accused you bitterly on the inhospitable wrong which your late landlord has sustained at your hand." "Had I been guilty of what you allude to," said Lord Glenvarloch, "had a moment of temptation hurried me away, I had long ere now most bitterly repented it. But whoever may have wronged the unhappy woman, it was not I. I never heard of her folly until within this hour." "Come, my lord," said Harriet, with some severity, "this sounds too much like affectation. I know there is among our modern youth a new creed respecting adultery as well as homicide. I would rather hear you speak of a revision of the Decalogue, with mitigated penalties in favour of the privileged orders. I would rather hear you do this than deny a fact in which you have been known to glory." "Glory! I never did, never would have taken honour to myself from such a cause," said Lord Glenvarloch. "I could not prevent other idle tongues and idle brains from making false inferences." "You would have known well enough how to stop their mouths, my lord," replied Harriet, "had they spoke of you what was unpleasing to your ears, and what the truth did not warrant. Come, my lord, remember your promise to confess, and indeed to confess is in this case in some slight sort to redress. I will grant you are young, the woman handsome, and, as I myself have observed, light-headed enough. Let me know where she is. Her foolish husband has still some compassion for her, will save her from infamy, perhaps in time receive her back. For we are a good-natured generation, we traitors. Do not, my lord, emulate those who work mischief merely for the pleasure of doing so. It is the very devil's worst quality." "Your grave remonstrances will drive me mad," said Nigel. "There is a show of sense and reason in what you say, and yet it is positively insisting on my telling the retreat of a fugitive of whom I know nothing earthly." It is well, my lord, answered Harriet coldly. You have a right, such as it is, to keep your own secrets, but since my discourse on these points seems so totally unavailing, we had better proceed to business. Yet your father's image rises before me, and seems to plead that I should go on. Be it as you will, sir, said Glenvarloch. He who doubts my word shall have no additional security for it. Well, my lord, in the sanctuary of Whitefriars, a place of refuge so unsuitable to young men of quality and character, I am told a murder was committed. And you believe that I did the deed, I suppose? God forbid, my lord, said Harriet. The coroner's inquest hath sat, and it appeared that your lordship, under your assumed name of Graham, behaved with the utmost bravery. No compliment, I pray you, said Nigel. I am only too happy to find that I did not murder, or am not believed to have murdered, the old man. True, my lord, said Harry, but even in this affair there lacks explanation. Your lordship embarked this morning in a wherry with a female, and it is said an immense sum of money, in specie and other valuables, but the woman has not since been heard of. I parted with her at Paul's Wharf, said Nigel, where she went ashore with her charge. I gave her a letter to that very man, John Christie. That is the waterman's story, but John Christie denies that he remembers anything of the matter. I am sorry to hear this, said the young nobleman. I hope in heaven she has not been trepanned for the treasure she had with her. I hope not, my lord, replied Harriet, but men's minds are much disturbed about it. Our national character suffers on all hands. Men remember the fatal case of Lord Sanquhar, hanged for the murder of a fencing master, and exclaim they will not have their wives whored and their property stolen by the nobility of Scotland. And all this is laid to my door, said Nigel. My exculpation is easy. I trust so, my lord, said Harriet. Nay, in this particular I do not doubt it. But why did you leave Whitefriars under such circumstances? Master Reginald Lowestoft sent a boat for me, with intimation to provide for my safety. I am sorry to say, replied Harriet, that he denies all knowledge of your lordship's motions, after having dispatched a messenger to you with some baggage. The watermen told me they were employed by him. Watermen, said Harriet. One of these proves to be an idle apprentice, an old acquaintance of mine. The other has escaped. But the fellow who is in custody persists in saying he was employed by your lordship, and you only. He lies, said Lord Glenvarloch hastily. He told me Master Lowestoft had sent him. I hope that kind-hearted gentleman is at liberty. He is, answered Harriet, and has escaped with a rebuke from the benchers for interfering in such a matter as your lordship's. The court desire to keep well with the young Templars in these times of commotion, or he had not come off so well. That is the only word of comfort I have heard from you, replied Nigel. But this poor woman, she and her trunk, were committed to the charge of 2 porters. So said the pretended waterman, but none of the fellows who ply at the wharf will acknowledge the employment. I see the idea makes you uneasy, my lord, but every effort is made to discover the poor woman's place of retreat, if indeed she yet lives. And now, my lord, my errand is spoken, so far as it relates exclusively to your lordship. What remains is matter of business of a more formal kind. Let us proceed to it without delay, said Lord Glenvarloch. I would hear of the affairs of any one rather than of my own. You cannot have forgotten, my lord, said Harriet, the transaction which took place some weeks since at Lord Huntingland's, by which a large sum of money was advanced for the redemption of your lordship's estate. I remember it perfectly, said Nigel, and your present austerity cannot make me forget your kindness on the occasion. Harriet bowed gravely and went on. That money was advanced under the expectation and hope that it might be replaced by the contents of a grant to your lordship under the royal sign manual, in payment of certain moneys due by the crown to your father. I trust your lordship understood the transaction at the time. I trust you now understand my resumption of its import, and hold it to be correct. Undeniably correct, answered Lord Glenvarloch. If the sums contained in the warrant cannot be recovered, my lands become the property of those who paid off the original holders of the mortgage, and now stand in their right. Even so, my lord, said Harriet, and your lordship's unhappy circumstances having, it would seem, alarmed these creditors, they are now, I am sorry to say, pressing for one or other of these alternatives, possession of the land, or payment of their debt. They have a right to one or other, answered Lord Glenvarloch, and as I cannot do the last in my present condition, I suppose they must enter on possession. Stay, my lord, replied Harriet. If you have ceased to call me a friend to your person, at least you shall see I am willing to be such to your father's house, were it but for the sake of your father's memory. If you will trust me with the warrant under the sign manual, I believe circumstances do now so stand at court that I may be able to recover the money for you. I would do so gladly, said Lord Glenvarloch, but the casket which contains it is not in my possession. It was seized when I was arrested at Greenwich. It will be no longer withheld from you, said Harriet, for I understand my master's natural good sense, and some information which he has procured, I know not how, has induced him to contradict the whole charge of the attempt on his person. It is entirely hushed up, and you will only be proceeded against for your violence on Lord Dalgarno, committed within the verge of the palace, and that you will find heavy enough to answer. I will not shrink under the weight, said Lord Glenvarloch, but that is not the present point. If I had that casket— Your baggage stood in the little anteroom as I passed, said the citizen. The casket caught my eye. I think you had it of me. It was my old friend Sir Faithful Frugal's. He too had a son. Here he stopped short. A son who, like Lord Glenvarloch's, did no credit to his father. Was it not so you would have ended the sentence, Master Harriet? Asked the young nobleman. My lord, it was a word spoken rashly, answered Harriet. God may mend all in his own good time. This, however, I will say, that I have sometimes envied my friends their fair and flourishing families, and yet have I seen such changes when death has removed the head, so many rich men's sons penniless, the heirs of so many knights and nobles acreless, that I think mine own estate and memory, as I shall order it, has a fair chance of outliving those of greater men, though God has given me no heir of my name. But this is from the purpose. Ho, warder, bring in Lord Glenvarloch's baggage. The officer obeyed. Seals had been placed upon the trunk and casket, but were now removed, the warder said, in consequence of the subsequent orders from court, and the whole was placed at the prisoner's free disposal. Desirous to bring this painful visit to a conclusion, Lord Glenvarloch opened the casket and looked through the papers which it contained, first hastily and then more slowly and accurately, but it was all in vain. The sovereign's signed warrant had disappeared. I thought and expected nothing better, said George Harriet bitterly. The beginning of evil is the letting out of water. Here is a fair heritage lost, I dare say, on a foul cast at dice, or a conjuring trick at cards. My lord, your surprise is well played. I give you full joy of your accomplishments. I have seen many as young brawlers and spendthrifts, but never as young and accomplished a dissembler. Nay, man, never bend your angry brows on me. I speak in bitterness of heart, from what I remember of your worthy father, and if his son hears of his degeneracy from no one else, he shall hear it from the old goldsmith. This new suspicion drove Nigel to the very extremity of his patience, yet the motives and zeal of the good old man, as well as the circumstances of suspicion which created his displeasure, were so excellent an excuse for it, that they formed an absolute curb on the resentment of Lord Glenvarloch, and constrained him after 2 or 3 hasty exclamations to observe a proud and sullen silence. At length Master Harriet resumed his lecture. Hark you, my lord, he said, it is scarce possible that this most important paper can be absolutely assigned away. Let me know in what obscure corner and for what petty sum it lies pledged. Something may yet be done. Your efforts in my favour are the more generous, said Lord Glenvarloch, as you offer them to one whom you believe you have cause to think hardly of, but they are altogether unavailing. Fortune has taken the field against me at every point. Even let her win the battle. Zounds, exclaimed Harriet impatiently, you would make a saint swear. Why, I tell you, if this paper, the loss of which seems to sit so light on you, be not found, farewell to the fair lordship of Glenvarloch. Firth and forest, lea and furrow, lake and stream, all that has been in the house of Oliphant since the days of William the Lion. Farewell to them then, said Nigel, and that moan is soon made. S'death, my lord, you will make more moan for it ere you die, said Harriet, in the same tone of angry impatience. Not I, my old friend, said Nigel. If I mourn, Master Harry, it will be for having lost the good opinion of a worthy man, and lost it, as I must say, most undeservedly. Ay, young man, said Harriet, shaking his head, make me believe that if you can. To sum the matter up, he said, rising from his seat and walking towards that occupied by the disguised female, for our matters are now drawn into small compass, you shall as soon make me believe that this masquerading mummer, on whom I now lay the hand of paternal authority, is a French page who understands no English. So saying, he took hold of the supposed page's cloak, and not without some gentle degree of violence led him into the middle of the apartment, the disguised fair one, who in vain attempted to cover her face, first with her mantle, and afterwards with her hands, both which impediments Master Harriet removed something unceremoniously, and gave to view the detected daughter of the old chronologist, his own fair goddaughter, Margaret Ramsay. "Here is goodly gear," he said, and as he spoke he could not prevent himself from giving her a slight shake, for we have elsewhere noticed that he was a severe disciplinarian. "How comes it, Minion, that I find you in so shameless a dress, and so unworthy a situation? Nay, your modesty is now mistimed. It should have come sooner. Speak, or I will." "Master Harriot," said Lord Glenvarloch, "whatever right you may have over this maiden elsewhere, while in my apartment she is under my protection." "Your protection, my lord, a proper protector. And how long, mistress, have you been under my lord's protection? Speak out, forsooth." "For the matter of 2 hours, godfather," answered the maiden, with a countenance bent to the ground, and covered with blushes, "but it was against my will." "2 hours," repeated Harriet, "space enough for mischief. My lord, this is, I suppose, another victim offered to your character of gallantry, another adventure to be boasted of at Beaujeu's ordinary. Methinks the roof under which you first met this silly maiden should have secured her at least from such a fate." "On my honour, Master Harriet," said Lord Glenvarloch, "you remind me now, for the first time, that I saw this young lady in your family. Her features are not easily forgotten, and yet I was trying in vain to recollect where I had last looked on them. For your suspicions, they are as false as they are injurious both to her and me. I had but discovered her disguise as you entered. I am satisfied from her whole behaviour that her presence here in this dress was involuntary, and God forbid that I have been capable of taking advantage of it to her prejudice." "It is well mouthed, my lord," said Master Harriet, "but a cunning clerk can read the Apocrypha as loud as the Scripture. Frankly, my lord, you are come to that pass where your words will not be received without a warrant." "I should not speak, perhaps," said Margaret, the natural vivacity of whose temper could never be long suppressed by any situation, however disadvantageous, "but I cannot be silent. Godfather, you do me wrong, and no less wrong to this young nobleman. You say his words want a warrant. I know where to find a warrant for some of them, and the rest I deeply and devoutly believe without one." "And I thank you, maiden," replied Nigel, "for the good opinion you have expressed. I'm at that point, it seems, though how I have been driven to it I know not, where every fair construction of my actions and motives is refused me. I am the more obliged to her who grants me that right which the world denies me. For you, lady, were I at liberty, I have a sword and arm, should know how to guard your reputation." "Upon my word, a perfect Amadis and Oriana," said George Harriet. "I should soon get my throat cut betwixt the knight and the princess, I suppose, but that the beef-eaters are happily within halloo. Come, come, Lady Light o' Love, if you mean to make your way with me, it must be by plain facts, not by speeches from romance and playbooks. How, in heaven's name, came you here?" "Sir," answered Margaret, "since I must speak, I went to Greenwich this morning with Mona Palla to present a petition to the king on the part of the Lady Hermione." "Mercy agad!" exclaimed Harriet, "is she in the dance too? Could she not have waited my return to stir in her affairs? But I suppose the intelligence I sent her had rendered her restless. Ah, woman, woman, he that goes partner with you had need of a double share of patience, for you will bring none into the common stock. Well, but what on earth had this embassy of Mona Palla's to do with your absurd disguise? Speak out." "Mona Palla was frightened," answered Margaret, "and did not know how to set about the errand, for you know she scarce ever goes out of doors, and so I agreed to go with her to give her courage. And for the dress, I am sure you remember I wore it at a Christmas mumming, and you thought it not unbeseeming." "Yes, for a Christmas parlour," said Harriet, "but not to go a masking through the country in. I do remember it, minion, and I knew it even now. That and your little shoe there, linked with a hint I had in the morning from a friend, or one who called himself such, led to your detection." Here Lord Glenvarloch could not help giving a glance at the pretty foot, which even the staid citizen thought worth recollection. It was but a glance, for he saw how much the least degree of observation added to Margaret's distress and confusion. "And tell me, maiden," continued Master Harriet, for what we have observed was by-play, "did the Lady Hermione know of this fair work?" "I dared not have told her for the world," said Margaret. "She thought one of our apprentices went with Mona Palla." It may be here noticed that the words "our apprentices" seem to have in them something of a charm to break the fascination with which Lord Glenvarloch had hitherto listened to the broken yet interesting details of Margaret's history. "And wherefore went he not? He had been a fitter companion for Mona Palla than you, I wot," said the citizen. "He was otherwise employed," said Margaret, in a voice scarce audible. Master George darted a hasty glance at Nigel, and when he saw his features betokened no consciousness, he muttered to himself, "It must be better than I feared." And so this cursed Spaniard, with her head full as they all have, of disguises, trapdoors, rope ladders, and masks, was Jaden fool enough to take you with her on this wild goose errand? And how sped you, I pray? Just as we reached the gate of the park, replied Margaret, the cry of treason was raised. I know not what became of Mona, but I ran till I fell into the arms of a very decent serving man called Linklater, and I was fain to tell him I was your goddaughter, and so he kept the rest of them from me, and got me to speech of his majesty, as I entreated him to do. It is the only sign you showed in the whole matter that common sense had not utterly deserted your little skull, said Harriet. His majesty, continued the damsel, was so gracious as to receive me alone, though the courtiers cried out against the danger to his person, and would have searched me for arms, God help me, but the king forbade it. I fancy he had a hint from Linklater how the truth stood with me. Well, maiden, I ask not what passed, said Harry. It becomes not me to pry into my master's secrets. Had you been closeted with his grandfather, the Red Tod of St. Andrews, as Davy Lindsay used to call him, by my faith I should have had my own thoughts of the matter, but our master, God bless him, is douce and temperate, and Solomon in everything, save in the chapter of wives and concubines. I know not what you mean, sir, answered Margaret. His majesty was most kind and compassionate, but said I must be sent hither, and that the lieutenant's lady, the Lady Mansell, would have her charge of me, and see that I sustained no wrong. And the king promised to send me in a tilted barge, and under conduct of a person well known to you, and thus I come to be in the Tower. But how or why in this apartment, nymph, said George Harriet. Expound that to me, for I think the riddle needs reading. I cannot explain it, sir, further than that the Lady Mansell sent me here, in spite of my earnest prayers, tears, and entreaties. I was not afraid of anything, for I knew I should be protected, but I could have died then, could die now, for very shame and confusion. Very well, if your tears are genuine, said Harriet, they may the sooner wash out the memory of your fault. Knows your father aught of this escape of yours? I would not for the world he did, replied she. He believes me with the Lady Hermione. I, honest Davy, can regulate his horologes better than his family. Come, damsel, now I will escort you back to the Lady Mansell, and pray her of her kindness that when she is again trusted with the goose, she will not give it to the fox to keep. The warders will let us pass to my lady's lodgings, I trust. Stay but one moment, said Lord Glenvarloch. Whatever hard opinion you may have formed of me, I forgive you, for time will show that you do me wrong, and you yourself, I think, will be the first to regret the injustice you have done me. But involve not in your suspicions this young person, for whose purity of thought angels themselves should be vouchers. I have marked every look, every gesture, and whilst I can draw breath, I shall ever think of her with— Think not at all of her, my lord, answered George Harriet, interrupting him. It is, I have a notion, the best favour you can do her, or think of her as the daughter of Davy Ramsay, the clockmaker, no proper subject for fine speeches, romantic adventures, or high-flown Arcadian compliments. I give you God den, my lord, I think not altogether so harshly as my speech may have spoken, if I can help, that is, if I saw my way clearly through this labyrinth, but it avails not talking now. I give your lordship God den. Here, warder, permit us to pass to the Lady Hansell's apartment. The warder said he must have orders from the lieutenant, and as he retired to procure them, the parties remained standing near each other, but without speaking, and scarce looking at each other, save by stealth, a situation which, in two of the party at least, was sufficiently embarrassing. The difference of rank, though in that age a consideration so serious, could not prevent Lord Glenvarloch from seeing that Margaret Ramsay was one of the prettiest young women he had ever beheld, from suspecting, he could scarce tell why, that he himself was not indifferent to her, from feeling assured that he had been the cause of much of her present distress, admiration, self-love, and generosity, acting in favour of the same object, and when the yeoman returned with permission to his guest to withdraw, Nigel's obeisance to the beautiful daughter of the mechanic was marked with an expression which called up in her cheeks as much colour as any incident of the eventful day had hitherto excited. She returned the courtesy timidly and irresolutely, clung to her godfather's arm, and left the apartment, which, dark as it was, had never yet appeared so obscure to Nigel as when the door closed behind her. End of chapter 29. Section 32 of The Fortunes of Nigel by Sir Walter Scott. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 30. Yet, though thou shouldst be dragged in scorn to yonder ignominious tree, thou shalt not want one faithful friend to share the cruel fate's decree. Ballad of Jemmy Dawson. Master George Heriot and his ward, as she might justly be termed, for his affection to Margaret imposed on him all the cares of a guardian, were ushered by the yeomen of the guard to the lodging of the lieutenant, where they found him seated with his lady. They were received by both with that decorous civility which Master Heriot's character and supposed influence demanded, even at the hand of a punctilious old soldier and courtier like Sir Edward Mansell. Lady Mansell received Margaret with like courtesy, and informed Master George that she was now only her guest and no longer her prisoner. She is at liberty, she said, to return to her friends under your charge. Such is his Majesty's pleasure. I am glad of it, madam, answered Harry, but only I could have wished her freedom had taken place before her foolish interview with that singular young man, and I marvel your ladyship permitted it. My good Master Heriot, said Sir Edward, we act according to the commands of one better and wiser than ourselves. Our orders from his Majesty must be strictly and literally obeyed, and I need not say that the wisdom of his Majesty doth more than ensure. I know his Majesty's wisdom well, said Heriot, yet there's an old proverb about fire and flax. Well, let it pass. I see Sir Mungo Malagrother stalking towards the door of the lodging, said the Lady Mansell, with the gait of a lame crane. It is his second visit this morning. He brought the warrant for discharging Lord Glenvarloch of the charge of treason, said Sir Edward. And from him, said Heriot, I heard much of what had befallen, for I came from France only late last evening, and somewhat unexpectedly. As they spoke, Sir Mungo entered the apartment, saluted the lieutenant of the Tower and his lady with ceremonious civility, honoured George Heriot with a patronizing nod of acknowledgment, and accosted Margaret with, Hey, my young charge, you have not doffed your masculine attire yet? She does not mean to lay it aside, Sir Mungo, said Heriot, speaking loud, until she has had satisfaction from you for betraying her disguise to me like a false knight. And in very deed, Sir Mungo, I think when you told me she was rambling about in so strange a dress, you might have said also that she was under Lady Mansell's protection. That was the king's secret, Master Heriot, said Sir Mungo, throwing himself into a chair with an air of atrabiliarious importance. The other was a well-meaning hint to yourself as the girl's friend. Yes, replied Heriot, it was done like yourself. Enough told to make me unhappy about her, not a word which could relieve my uneasiness. Sir Mungo will not hear that remark, said the lady. We must change the subject. Is there any news from court, Sir Mungo? You have been to Greenwich? You might as well ask me, madam, answered the knight, whether there's any news from hell. How, Sir Mungo, how? Said Sir Edward. Measure your words something better. You speak of the court of King James. Sir Edward, if I spoke of the court of the 12 Kaisers, I would say it is as confused for the present as the infernal regions. Courtiers of 40 years standing, and such I may write myself, are as far to seek in the matter as a minnow in the maelstrom. Some folk say the king has frowned on the prince, some that the prince has looked grave on the duke, some that Lord Glenvarloch will be hanged for high treason, and some that there is matter against Lord Dalgarno that may cost him as much as his head's worth. And what do you that are a courtier for 40 years standing think of it all? Said Sir Edward Mansell. Nay, nay, do not ask him, Sir Edward, said the lady with an expressive look to her husband. Sir Mungo is too witty, added Master Heriot, to remember that he who says aught that may be repeated to his own prejudice does but load a piece for any of the company to shoot him dead with at their pleasure and convenience. What, said the bold knight, you think I am afraid of the trepanned? Why now, what if I should say that Dalgarno has more wit than honesty, the duke more sail than ballast, the prince more pride than prudence, and that the king, the Lady Mansell held up her finger in a warning manner, that the king is my very good master, who has given me for 40 years and more dog's wages, victualless sit, bones, and beating. Why now, all this is said, and Archie Armstrong says worse than this of the best of them every day. The more fool he, said George Heriot, yet he is not so utterly wrong, for folly is his best wisdom. But do not you, Sir Mungo, set your wit against a fool's, though he be a court fool. A fool, said you, replied Sir Mungo, not having fully heard what Master Heriot said, or not choosing to have it thought so. I've been a fool indeed to hang on at a close-fisted court here, when men of understanding and men of action have been making fortunes in every other place of Europe. But here a man comes indifferently off, unless he gets a great key to turn, looking at Sir Edward, or can beat tattoo with a hammer on a pewter plate. Well, sirs, I must make as much haste back on mine errand as if I were a feed messenger. Sir Edward and my lady, I leave my commendations with you, and my goodwill with you, Master Harriot, and for this breaker of bounds, if you will act by my counsel, some maceration by fasting and a gentle use of the rod is the best cure for her giddy fits. If you propose for Greenwich, Sir Mungo, said the lieutenant, I can spare you the labour. The king comes immediately to Whitehall. And that must be the reason the council are summoned to meet in such hurry, said Sir Mungo. Well, I will, with your permission, go to the poor lad Locke, and bestow some comfort on him. The lieutenant seemed to look up and pause for a moment as if in doubt. The lad will want a pleasant companion, who can tell him the nature of the punishment which he is to suffer, and other matters of concernment. I will not leave him until I show him how absolutely he hath ruined himself from feather to spur, how deplorable is his present state, and how small his chance of mending it. Well, Sir Mungo, replied the lieutenant, if you really think all this likely to be very consolatory to the party concerned, I will send a warder to conduct you. And I, said George Heriot, will humbly pray of Lady Mansell that she will lend some of her handmaiden's apparel to this giddy-brained girl, for I shall forfeit my reputation if I walk up Tower Hill with her in that mad guise, and yet the silly lassie looks not so ill in it neither. I will send my coach with you instantly, said the obliging lady. Faith, madam, and if you will honour us by such courtesy, I will gladly accept it at your hands, said the citizen, for business presses hard on me, and the forenoon is already lost to little purpose. The coach, being ordered accordingly, transported the worthy citizen and his charge to his mansion in Lombard Street. There he found his presence was anxiously expected by the Lady Hermione, who had just received an order to be in readiness to attend upon the royal privy council in the course of an hour, and upon whom, in her inexperience of business, and long retirement from society and the world, the intimation had made as deep an impression as if it had not been the necessary consequence of the petition which he had presented to the king by Mona Paula. George Heriot gently blamed her for taking any steps in an affair so important until his return from France, especially as he had requested her to remain quiet, in a letter which accompanied the evidence he had transmitted to her from Paris. She could only plead in answer the influence which her immediately stirring in the matter was likely to have on the affair of her kinsman, Lord Glenvarloch, for she was ashamed to acknowledge how much she had been gained on by the eager importunity of her youthful companion. The motive of Margaret's eagerness was of course the safety of Nigel, but we must leave it to time to show in what particulars that came to be connected with the petition of the Lady Hermione. Meanwhile we return to the visit with which Sir Mungo Malagrotha favoured the afflicted young nobleman in his place of captivity. The knight, after the usual salutations, and having prefaced his discourse with a great deal of professed regret for Nigel's situation, sat down beside him, and composing his grotesque features into the most lugubrious despondence, began his raven song as follows. I bless God, my lord, that I was the person who had the pleasure to bring his majesty's mild message to the lieutenant, discharging the higher prosecution against ye for anything meditated against his majesty's sacred person. For admit you be prosecuted on the lesser offence, or breach of privilege of the palace and its precincts, usque ad mutilationem, even to dismemberation, as it is most likely you will, yet the loss of a member is nothing to being hanged and drawn quick after the fashion of a traitor. I should feel the shame of having deserved such a punishment, answered Nigel, more than the pain of undergoing it. Doubtless, my lord, the having, as you say, deserved it, must be an excruciation to your own mind, replied his tormentor, a kind of mental and metaphysical hanging, drawing, and quartering, which may be in some measure equivalent with the external application of hemp, iron, fire, and the like, to the outer man. I say, Sir Mungo, repeated Nigel, and beg you to understand my words, that I am unconscious of any error, save that of having arms on my person when I chance to approach that of my sovereign. Ye are right, my lord, to acknowledge nothing, said Sir Mungo. We have an old proverb, confess, and so forth. And indeed, as to the weapons, his majesty has a special ill will at all arms whatsoever, and more especially pistols. But as I said, there is an end of that matter. I wish you as well through the next, which is altogether unlikely. Surely, Sir Mungo, answered Nigel, you yourself might say something in my favour concerning the affair in the park. None knows better than you that I was at that moment urged by wrongs of the most heinous nature, offered to me by Lord Dalgarno, many of which were reported to me by yourself, much to the inflammation of my passion. Alack-a-day, alack-a-day, replied Sir Mungo, I remember but too well how much your choler was inflamed, in spite of the various remonstrances which I made to you respecting the sacred nature of the place. Alas, alas, you cannot say you leaped into the mire for want of warning. I see, Sir Mungo, you are determined to remember nothing which can do me service, said Nigel. Blithely would I do ye service, said the knight, and the best work I can think of is to tell you the process of the punishment to the whilk you will be indubitably subjected, I having had the good fortune to behold it performed in the Queen's time on a chield that had written a pasquinado. I was then in my Lord Grey's train, who lay illeaguer here, and being always covetous of pleasing and profitable sights, I could not dispense with being present on the occasion. I should be surprised indeed, said Lord Glenvarloch, if you had so far put restraint upon your benevolence as to stay away from such an exhibition. Hey, was your lordship praying me to be present at your own execution? Answered the knight. Troth, my lord, it will be a painful sight to a friend, but I will rather punish myself than balk you. It is a pretty pageant in the main, a very pretty pageant. The fellow came on with such a bold face, it was a pleasure to look on him. He was dressed all in white, to signify harmlessness and innocence. The thing was done on a scaffold at Westminster. Most likely yours will be at the Charing. There were the sheriffs and the marshal's men and what not, the executioner with his cleaver and mallet, and his man with a pan of hot charcoal and the irons for cautery. He was a dexterous fellow, that Derrick. This man Gregory is not fit to jipper a joint with him. It might be worth your lordship's while to have the loon sent to a barber surgeon's to learn some needful scantling of anatomy. It may be for the benefit of yourself and other unhappy sufferers, and also a kindness to Gregory. I will not take the trouble, said Nigel. If the laws will demand my hand, the executioner may get it off as he best can. If the king leaves it where it is, it may chance to do him better service. Very noble, very grand indeed, my lord, said Sir Mungo. It is pleasant to see a brave man suffer. This fellow whom I spoke of, this Tubbs or Stubbs, or whatever the plebeian was called, came forward as bold as an emperor, and said to the people, Good friends, I come to leave here the hand of a true Englishman, and clapped it on the dressing block with as much ease as if he had laid it on his sweetheart's shoulder, whereupon Derrick the hangman, adjusting, do you mind me, the edge of his cleaver on the very joint, hit it with the mallet with such force that the hand flew off as far from the owner as a gauntlet, which the challenger cast down in the tilt yard. Well, sir, Stubbs or Tubbs lost no whit of countenance until the fellow clapped the hissing hot iron on his raw stump. My lord, it fizzed like a rasher of bacon, and the fellow set up an Elrich screech, which made some think his courage was abated, but not a whit, for he plucked off his hat with his left hand, and waved it, crying, God save the Queen, and confound all evil counsellors. The people gave him 3 cheers, which he deserved for his stout heart, and truly I hope to see your lordship suffer with the same magnanimity. I thank you, Sir Mungo, said Nigel, who had not been able to forbear some natural feelings of an unpleasant nature during this lively detail. I have no doubt the exhibition will be a very engaging one to you and the other spectators, whatever it may prove to the party principally concerned. Very engaging, answered Sir Mungo, very interesting indeed, though not altogether so much so as an execution for high treason. I saw Digby the Winter's Fox and the rest of the gunpowder gang suffer for that treason, whilk was a very grand spectacle, as well in regard to their sufferings as to their constancy in enduring. I am the more obliged to your goodness, Sir Mungo, replied Nigel, that has induced you, although you have lost the sight, to congratulate me on my escape from the hazard of making the same edifying appearance. As you say, my lord, answered Sir Mungo, the loss is chiefly in appearance. Nature has been very bountiful to us, and has given duplicates of some organs that we may endure the loss of one of them, should some such circumstance chance in our pilgrimage. See my poor Dexter abridged to 1 thumb, 1 finger, and a stump, by the blow of my adversary's weapon, however, and not by any carnificial knife. Weel, sir, this poor maimed hand doth me in some sort as much service as ever, and admit yours to be taken off by the wrist. You have still your left hand for your service, and are better off than the little Dutch dwarf here about town, who threads a needle, limns, writes, and tosses a pike, merely by means of his feet, without ever a hand to help him. Well, Sir Mungo, said Lord Glenvarloch, this is all no doubt very consolatory, but I hope the king will spare my hand to fight for him in battle, where, notwithstanding all your kind encouragement, I could spend my blood much more cheerfully than on a scaffold. It is even a sad truth, replied Sir Mungo, that your lordship was but too like to have died on a scaffold, not a soul to speak for you, but that deluded lassie, Maggie Ramsay. Whom mean you? Said Nigel, with more interest than he had hitherto shown in the knight's communications. Nay, who should I mean but that travestied lassie whom we dined with when we honoured Harriet the goldsmith. Ye ken best how you have made interest with her, but I saw her on her knees to the king for you. She was committed to my charge to bring her up hither in honour and safety. Had I had my own will, I would have had her to Bridewell to flog the wild blood out of her. A cutty queen to think of wearing the breeches, and not so much as married yet. Hark ye, Sir Mungo Malagrother, answered Nigel, I would have you talk of that young person with fitting respect. With all the respect that befits your lordship's paramour and Davy Ramsay's daughter, I shall certainly speak of her, my lord, said Sir Mungo, assuming a dry tone of irony. Nigel was greatly disposed to have made a serious quarrel of it, but with Sir Mungo such an affair would have been ridiculous. He smothered his resentment, therefore, and conjured him to tell what he had heard and seen respecting this young person. Simply that I was in the ante-room when she had audience, and heard the king say to my great perplexity, Pulchra sana puella, and Maxwell, who hath but indifferent Latin ears, thought that his majesty called on him by his own name of Sawney, and thrust into the presence, and there I saw our sovereign James with his own hand raising up the lassie, who, as I said heretofore, was travestied in man's attire. I should have had my own thoughts of it, but our gracious master is old, and was nae great ravager among the queans even in his youth, and he was comforting her in his own way, and saying, Ye needna greet about it, my bonny woman. Glenvarlochades shall have fair play. And indeed, when the hurry was off our spirits, we could not believe that he had any design on our person, and touching his other offences, we will look wisely and closely into the matter. So I got charged to take the young fence-looper to the tower here, and deliver her to the charge of Lady Mansell, and his majesty charged me to say not a word to her about your offences, for, said he, the poor thing is breaking her heart for him. And on this you have charitably founded the opinion to the prejudice of this young lady, which you have now thought proper to express, said Lord Glenvarloch. In honest truth, my lord, replied Sir Mungo, what opinion would you have me form of a wench who gets into male habiliments, and goes on her knees to the king for a wild young nobleman? I wot not what the fashionable word may be, for the phrase changes, though the custom abides, but truly I must needs think this young leddy, if you call Watchy Ramsay's daughter a young leddy, demeans herself more like a leddy of pleasure than a leddy of honour. You do her egregious wrong, Sir Mungo, said Nigel, or whether you have been misled by appearances. So will all the world be misled, my lord, replied the satirist, unless you were doing that to disabuse them, which your father's son will hardly judge it fit to do. And what may that be, I pray you? E'en marry the lass, make her Lady Glenvarloch. Ay, ye may start, but it's the course you are driving on. Rather marry than do worse, if the worst be not done already. Sir Mungo, said Nigel, I pray you to forbear this subject, and rather return to that of the mutilation upon which it pleased you to enlarge a short while since. I have not time at present, said Sir Mungo, hearing the clock strike 4, but so soon as you shall have received sentence, my lord, you may rely on my giving you the fullest detail of the whole solemnity, and I give you my word as a knight and a gentleman, that I will myself attend you on the scaffold, whoever may cast sour looks on me for doing so. I bear a heart to stand by a friend in the worst of times. So saying, he wished Lord Glenvarloch farewell, who felt as heartily rejoiced at his departure, though it may be a bold word, as any person who had ever undergone his society. But when left to his own reflections, Nigel could not help feeling solitude nearly as irksome as the company of Sir Mungo Malagrother. The total wreck of his fortune, which seemed now to be rendered unavoidable by the loss of the royal warrant that had afforded him the means of redeeming his paternal estate, was an unexpected and additional blow. When he had seen the warrant he could not precisely remember, but was inclined to think it was in the casket when he took out money to pay the miser for his lodgings at Whitefriars. Since then the casket had been almost constantly under his own eye, except during the short time he was separated from his baggage by the arrest in Greenwich Park. It might indeed have been taken out at that time, for he had no reason to think either his person or his property was in the hands of those who wished him well, but on the other hand the locks of the strong box has sustained no violence that he could observe, and, being of a particular and complicated construction, he thought they could scarce be opened without an instrument made on purpose adapted to their peculiarities, and for this there had been no time. But speculate as he would on the matter, it was clear that this important document was gone, and probable that it had passed into no friendly hands. Let it be so, said Nigel to himself. I am scarcely worse off, respecting my prospects of fortune, than when I first reached this accursed city. But to be hampered with cruel accusations, and stained with foul suspicions, to be the object of pity of the most degrading kind to yonder honest citizen, and of the malignity of that envious and atrabilarious courtier, who can endure the good fortune and good qualities of another no more than the mole can brook sunshine, this is indeed a deplorable reflection, and the consequences must stick to my future life, and impede whatever my head or my hand, if it is left me, might be able to execute in my favor. The feeling that he is the object of general dislike and dereliction seems to be one of the most unendurably painful to which a human being can be subjected. The most atrocious criminals, whose nerves have not shrunk from perpetrating the most horrid cruelty, endure more from the consciousness that no man will sympathize with their sufferings than from apprehension of the personal agony of their impending punishment, and are known often to attempt to palliate their enormities, and sometimes altogether to deny what is established by the clearest proof, rather than to leave life under the general ban of humanity. It was no wonder that Nigel, labouring under the sense of general, though unjust suspicion, should, while pondering on so painful a theme, recollect that one at least had not only believed him innocent, but hazarded herself with all her feeble power to interpose in his behalf. Poor girl, he repeated, poor, rash, but generous maiden, your fate is that of her in Scottish story, who thrust her arm into the staple of the door to oppose it as a bar against the assassins who threatened the murder of her sovereign. The deed of devotion was useless, save to give an immortal name to her by whom it was done, and whose blood flows, it is said, in the veins of my house. I cannot explain to the reader whether the recollection of this historical deed of devotion, and the lively effect which the comparison, a little overstrained perhaps, was likely to produce in favour of Margaret Ramsay, was not qualified by the concomitant ideas of ancestry and ancient descent with which that recollection was mingled, but the contending feelings suggested a new train of ideas. Ancestry, he thought, and ancient descent, what are they to me? My patrimony alienated, my title become a reproach, for what can be so absurd as titled beggary? My character subjected to suspicion. I will not remain in this country, and should I, at leaving it, procure the society of one so lovely, so brave, and so faithful, who should say that I derogated from the rank which I am virtually renouncing? There was something romantic and pleasing as he pursued this picture of an attached and faithful pair, becoming all the world to each other, and stemming the tide of fate arm in arm, and to be linked thus with a creature so beautiful, and who had taken such devoted and disinterested concern in his fortunes, formed itself into such a vision as romantic youth loves best to dwell upon. Suddenly his dream was painfully dispelled by the recollection that its very basis rested upon the most selfish ingratitude on his own part. Lord of his castle and his towers, his forests and fields, his fair patrimony and noble name, his mind would have rejected as a sort of impossibility the idea of elevating to his rank the daughter of a mechanic. But when degraded from his nobility and plunged into poverty and difficulties, he was ashamed to feel himself not unwilling that this poor girl, in the blindness of her affection, should abandon all the better prospects of her own settled condition to embrace the precarious and doubtful course which he himself was condemned to. The generosity of Nigel's mind recoiled from the selfishness of the plan of happiness which he projected, and he made a strong effort to expel from his thoughts for the rest of the evening this fascinating female, or at least not to permit them to dwell upon the perilous circumstance that she was at present the only creature living who seemed to consider him as an object of kindness. He could not, however, succeed in banishing her from his slumbers, when, after having spent a weary day, he betook himself to a perturbed couch. The form of Margaret mingled with the wild mass of dreams which his late adventures had suggested, and even when copying the lively narrative of Sir Mungo, fancy presented to him the blood bubbling and hissing on the heated iron. Margaret stood behind him like a spirit of light, to breathe healing on the wound. At length nature was exhausted by these fantastic creations, and Nigel slept, and slept soundly until awakened in the morning by the sound of a well-known voice which had often broken his slumbers about the same hour. End of chapter 30. Section 33 of The Fortunes of Nigel by Sir Walter Scott. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 31. Many come up, sir, with your gentle blood. Here's a red stream beneath this coarse blue doublet that warms the heart as kindly as if drawn from the far source of old Assyrian kings, who first made mankind subject to their sway. Old play. The sounds to which we alluded in our last were no other than the grumbling tones of Richie Moniples' voice. This worthy, like some other persons who rank high in their own opinion, was very apt, when he could have no other auditor, to hold conversation with one who was sure to be a willing listener, I mean with himself. He was now brushing and arranging Lord Glenvarloch's clothes with as much composure and quiet assiduity as if he had never been out of his service, and grumbling betwixt whiles to the following purpose: Hump, time, cloak and jerkin were through my hands. I question if horsehair has been passed over them since they and I last parted. The embroidery finely frayed too, and the gold buttons of the cloak, by my conscience, and as I am an honest man, there is a round dozen of them gain. This comes of Alsatian frolics. God keep us with his grace, and not give us over to our own devices. I see no sword, but that will be in respect of present circumstances. Nigel for some time could not help believing that he was still in a dream, so improbable did it seem that his domestic, whom he supposed to be in Scotland, should have found him out and obtained access to him in his present circumstances. Looking through the curtains, however, he became well assured of the fact, when he beheld the stiff and bony length of Richie, with a visage charged with nearly double its ordinary degree of importance, employed sedulously in brushing his master's cloak, and refreshing himself with whistling or humming, from interval to interval, some snatch of an old melancholy Scottish ballad tune. Although sufficiently convinced of the identity of the party, Lord Glenvarloch could not help expressing his surprise in the superfluous question, "In the name of heaven, Richie, is this you?" "And why else should it be, my lord?" answered Richie. "I dremna that your lordship's levy in this place is like to be attended by ony that are not bounded thereto by duty." "I'm rather surprised," answered Nigel, "that it should be attended by any one at all, especially by you, Richie, for you know that we parted, and I thought you'd reached Scotland long since." "I crave your lordship's pardon, but we have not parted yet, nor are soon likely so to do, for there gang tway folks votes to the unmaking of a bargain, as to the making of ane. Though it was your lordship's pleasure so to conduct yourself that we were like to have parted, yet it was not on reflection my will to be gone. To be plain, if your lordship does not can, when you have a good servant, I can, when I have a kind master, and to say truth, you will be easier served now than ever, for there is not much chance of your getting out of bounds." "I am indeed bound over to good behaviour," said Lord Glenvarloch with a smile, "but I hope you will not take advantage of my situation to be too severe on my follies, Richie." "God forbid, my lord, God forbid," replied Richie, with an expression betwixt a conceited consciousness of superior wisdom and real feeling, "especially in consideration of your lordship's having a due sense of them. I did indeed remonstrate, as was my humble duty, but I scorn to cast that up to your lordship now. Nay, nay, I am myself an erring creature, very conscious of some small weaknesses. There is no perfection in man." "But Richie," said Lord Glenvarloch, "although I am much obliged to you for your proffered service, it can be of little use to me here, and may be of prejudice to yourself." "Your lordship shall pardon me again," said Richie, whom the relative situation of the parties had invested with 10 times his ordinary dogmatism, "but as I will manage the matter, your lordship shall be greatly benefited by my service, and I myself no whit prejudiced." "I see not how that can be, my friend," said Lord Glenvarloch, "since, even as to your pecuniary affairs—" "Touching my pecuniars, my lord," replied Richie, "I'm indifferently weel provided, and as it chances, my living here will be no burden to your lordship, or distress to myself, only I crave permission to annex certain conditions to my servitude with your lordship." "Annex what you will," said Lord Glenvarloch, "for you are pretty sure to take your own way whether you make any conditions or not. Since you will not leave me, which were, I think, your wisest course, you must, and I suppose will, serve me only on such terms as you like yourself. All that I ask, my lord, said Ritchie gravely and with a tone of great moderation, is to have the uninterrupted command of my own motions for certain important purposes which I have now in hand, always giving your lordship the solace of my company and attendance at such times as may be at once convenient for me and necessary for your service. Of which I suppose you constitute yourself sole judge, replied Nigel, smiling. Unquestionably, my lord, answered Ritchie gravely, for your lordship can only know what yourself want, whereas I, who see both sides of the picture, can both what is the best for your affairs and what is the most needful for my own. Ritchie, my good friend, said Nigel, I fear this arrangement, which places the master much under the disposal of the servant, would scarce suit us if we were both at large, but a prisoner as I am, I may be as well at your disposal as I am at that of so many other persons, and so you may come and go as you list, for I suppose you will not take my advice to return to your own country and leave me to my fate. The deal be in my feet if I do, said Meniples. I'm not the lad to leave your lordship in foul weather, when I followed you and fed you through the whole summer day, and besides there may be brave days behind, for that has come and gane yet, for it's hame, and it's hame, and it's hame we fain would be, though the cloud is in the lift and the wind is on the lee, for the sun through the murk blinks live on mine says I'll shine on ye yet in our ain country. Having sung this stanza in the manner of a ballad singer, whose voice had been cracked by matching his windpipe against the bugle of the north blast, Ritchie Meniples aided Lord Glenvarloch to rise, attended his toilet with every possible mark of the most solemn and deferential respect, then waited upon him at breakfast, and finally withdrew, pleading that he had business of importance, which would detain him for some hours. Although Lord Glenvarloch necessarily expected to be occasionally annoyed by the self-conceit and dogmatism of Ritchie Meniples' character, yet he could not but feel the greatest pleasure from the firm and devoted attachment which this faithful follower had displayed in the present instance, and indeed promised himself an alleviation of the ennui of his imprisonment in having the advantage of his services. It was therefore with pleasure that he learned from the warder that his servants' attendance would be allowed at all times when the general rules of the fortress permitted the entrance of strangers. In the meanwhile the magnanimous Ritchie Meniples had already reached Tower Wharf, here after looking with contempt on several scholars, by whom he was plied, and whose services he rejected with a wave of his hand, he called with dignity first doors, and stirred into activity several lounging Tritons of the higher order, who had not on his first appearance thought it worth while to accost him with proffers of service. He now took possession of a wherry, folded his arms within his ample cloak, and sitting down in the stern with an air of importance, commanded them to row to Whitehall stairs. Having reached the palace in safety, he demanded to see Master Linklater, the under clerk of his Majesty's kitchen. The reply was that he was not to be spoken withal, being then employed in cooking a mess of cockaliki for the king's own mouth. Tell him, said Meniples, that it is a dear countryman of his who seeks to converse with him on matter of high import. A dear countryman, said Linklater, when this pressing message was delivered to him. Well, let him come in, and be damned that I should say, this now is some red-headed, long-legged, gilly, white-foot frae the Westport, that, hearing of my promotion, has come up to be a turn-broche, or deputy scullion, through my interest. It is a great hindrance to any man who would rise in the world to have such friends to hang by his skirts, in hope of being towed up along with him. Ha, Ritchie Meniples, man is it thou, and what has brought ye here, if they should ken thee for the loon that scared the horse the other day? No more of that, neighbour, said Ritchie. I'm just here on the old errand. I maun speak with the king. The king, your Redwood, said Linklater, then shouted to his assistant in the kitchen. Look to the broches, ye knaves, piscus purga sal cementa fac macerentur pulchra. I will make you understand Latin, ye knaves, as becomes the scullions of King James. Then in a cautious tone to Ritchie's private ear he continued, Know ye not how ill your master came off the other day? I can tell you that job made some folk shake for their office. Weel, but Laurie, ye maun befriend me this time and get this wee bit sification slipped into his Majesty's ain most gracious hand. I promise you the contents will be most grateful to him. Ritchie, answered Linklater, you have certainly sworn to say your prayers in the porter's lodge with your back bare, and 2 grooms with dog whips to cry amen to you. Nay, nay, Laurie, lad, said Ritchie, I ken better what belangs to sifications than I did yon day. and ye will say that yoursel if ye will but get that bit note to the king's hand. I will have neither hand nor foot in the matter, said the cautious clerk of the kitchen, but there is His Majesty's mess of cockaliki just going to be served to him in his closet. I cannot prevent you from putting the letter between the gilt bowl and the platter. His Sacred Majesty will see it when he lifts the bowl, for he aye drinks out the broth. Enough said, replied Ritchie, and deposited the paper accordingly, just before a page entered to carry away the mess to His Majesty. A wheel, neighbour, said Lawrence, when the mess was taken away, if ye have done ony thing to bring yoursel to the withy or the scourging post, it is your ain wilful deed. I will blame no other for it, said Ritchie, and with that undismayed pertinacity of conceit which made a fundamental part of his character, he abode the issue, which was not long of arriving. In a few minutes Maxwell himself arrived in the apartment, and demanded hastily who had placed a writing on the king's trencher. Linklater denied all knowledge of it, but Ritchie Manipley, stepping boldly forward, pronounced the emphatical confession, I am the man. Follow me then, said Maxwell, after regarding him with a look of great curiosity. They went up a private staircase, even that private staircase, the privilege of which at court is accounted a nearer road to power than the grand entree themselves. Arriving at what Ritchie described as an ill redd-up anteroom, the usher made a sign to him to stop, while he went into the king's closet. Their conference was short, and as Maxwell opened the door to retire, Ritchie heard the conclusion of it. Ye are sure he is not dangerous? I was caught once. Bide within call, but not nearer the door than within 3 geometrical cubits. If I speak loud, start to me like a falcon. If I speak loud, keep your lang lugs out of earshot, and now let him come in. Ritchie passed forward at Maxwell's mute signal, and in a moment found himself in the presence of the king. Most men of Ritchie's birth and breeding, and many others, would have been abashed at finding themselves alone with their sovereign. But Ritchie Manipley's had an opinion of himself too high to be controlled by any such ideas, and having made his stiff reverence, he arose once more into his perpendicular height, and stood before James as stiff as a hedge stake. Have ye gotten them, man? Have ye gotten them? Said the king in a fluttered state, betwixt hope and eagerness, and some touch of suspicious fear. Give me them, before ye speak a word, I charge you, on your allegiance. Ritchie took a box from his bosom, and stooping on one knee, presented it to His Majesty, who hastily opened it, and having ascertained that it contained a certain carcanet of rubies, with which the reader was formerly made acquainted, he could not resist falling into a sort of rapture, kissing the gems as if they had been capable of feeling, and repeating again and again, with childish delight, Onyx cum prole, silexque, onyx cum prole. Ah, my bright and bonny sparklers, my heart loops light to see you again. He then turned to Ritchie, upon whose stoical countenance His Majesty's demeanour had excited something like a grim smile, which James interrupted his rejoicing to reprehend, saying, Take heed, sir, you are not to laugh at us. We are your anointed sovereign. God forbid that I should laugh, said Ritchie, composing his countenance into its natural rigidity. I did but smile to bring my visage into coincidence and conformity with your Majesty's physiognomy. Ye speak as a dutiful subject and an honest man, said the king, but what deals your name, man? Even Ritchie Maniplys, the son of old Mungo Maniplys, at the west port of Edinburgh, who had the honour to supply your Majesty's mother's royal table, as weal as your Majesty's with flesh and other vivers when time was. Aha, said the king, laughing, for he possessed, as a useful attribute of his situation, a tenacious memory which recollected every one with whom he was brought into casual contact. Ye are the self-same traitor who had weel nigh couped us endlang on the causey of our ain courtyard, but we stuck by our mare, aquam memento rebus in arduis suare. We'll be not dismayed, Ritchie, for as many men have turned traitors, it is but fair that a traitor now and then should prove to be contra expectanda a true man. How came he by our jewels, man? Came he on the part of George Heriot? In no sort, said Ritchie. May it please your Majesty, I come as Harry Wynd fought, utterly for my own hand, and on no man's errand, as indeed I call no one master save him that made me, your most gracious Majesty who governs me, and the noble Nigel Oliphant, Lord of Glenvarloch, who maintained me as lang as he could maintain himself, poor nobleman. Glenvarloch at ease again, exclaimed the king. By my honour, he lies in ambush for us at every corner. Maxwell knocks at the door. It is George Heriot come to tell us he cannot find these jewels. Get thee behind the arras, Richie. Stand close, man. Sneeze not, cough not, breathe not. Jingling Geordie is so damnably ready with his gold ends of wisdom, and say accursedly backward with his gold ends of siller, that by our royal Saul we are glad to get a hair in his neck. Richie got behind the arras in obedience to the commands of the good-natured king, while the monarch, who never allowed his dignity to stand in the way of a frolic, having adjusted with his own hand the tapestry so as to complete the ambush, commanded Maxwell to tell him what was the matter without. Maxwell's reply was so low as to be lost by Richie Maniples, the peculiarity of whose situation by no means abated his curiosity and desire to gratify it to the uttermost. Let Geordie Heriot come in, said the king, and as Richie could observe through a slit in the tapestry, the honest citizen, if not actually agitated, was at least discomposed. The king, whose talent for wit or humour was precisely of a kind to be gratified by such a scene as ensued, received his homage with calmness, and began to talk to him with an air of serious dignity, very different from the usual indecorous levity of his behaviour. Master Heriot, he said, if we are right, remember, we opinionated in your hands certain jewels of the crown for a certain sum of money, did we or did we not? My most gracious sovereign, said Heriot, indisputably your majesty was pleased to do so. The property of which jewels and camellia remained with us, continued the king, in the same solemn tone, subject only to your claim of advance thereupon, which advance being repaid, gives us right to repossession of the thing opinionated, or pledged, or laid in wad. Vetus, Vinius, Grion, Virginius, Pagin, Stecorus, and all who have treated der contractu opiniorationis consentient in eundem, agree on the same point. The Roman law, the English common law, and the municipal law of our ancient kingdom of Scotland, though they split in mere particulars than I could desire, unite as strictly in this as the three strands of a twisted rope. May it please your majesty, replied Heriot, it requires not so many learned authorities to prove to any honest man that his interest in a pledge is determined when the money lent is restored. Weel, sir, I proffer restoration of the sum lent, and I demand to be repossessed of the jewels pledged with you. I gave ye a hint, brief while since, that this would be essential to my service, for as approaching events are like to call us into public, it would seem strange if we did not appear with those ornaments which are heirlooms of the crown, and the absence whereof is like to place us in contempt and suspicion with our liege subjects. Master George Heriot seemed much moved by this address of his sovereign, and replied with emotion, I call heaven to witness that I am totally harmless in this matter, and that I would willingly lose the sum advanced, so that I could restore those jewels, the absence of which your majesty so justly laments. Had the jewels remained with me, the account of them would be easily rendered, but your majesty will do me the justice to remember that, by your express order, I transferred them to another person, who advanced a large sum just about the time of my departure for Paris. The money was pressingly wanted, and no other means to come by it occurred to me. I told your majesty when I brought the needful supply that the man from whom the moneys were obtained was of no good repute, and your most princely answer was, smelling to the gold, Non olit, it smells not of the means that have gotten it. Weel, man, said the king, but what needs this din? If ye gave my jewels in pledge to such a one, should ye not as a liege subject have taken care that the redemption was in our power? And are we to suffer the loss of our camellia by your neglect, besides being exposed to the scorn and censure of our lieges and of the foreign ambassadors? My lord and liege king, said Heriot, God knows, if my bearing blame or shame in this matter would keep it from your majesty, it were my duty to endure both, as a servant grateful for many benefits. But when your majesty considers the violent death of the man himself, the disappearance of his daughter, and of his wealth, I trust you will remember that I warned your majesty in humble duty of the possibility of such casualties, and prayed you not to urge me to deal with him on your behalf. But you brought me nae better means, said the king. Geordie, ye brought me nae better means. I was like a deserted man. What could I do but grip to the first siller that offered, as a drowning man grasps to the willow wand that comes readiest? And now, man, what for have ye not brought back the jewels? They are surely above ground if ye wad make strict search. All strict search has been made, may it please your majesty, replied the citizen. Hue and cry has been sent out everywhere, and it has been found impossible to recover them. Difficult, you mean, Geordie, not impossible, replied the king. for that Wilk is impossible is either naturally so exempli gratia, to make two into three, or morally so as to make what is truth falsehood, but what is only difficult may come to pass with assistance of wisdom and patience, as for example, Jingling Geordie, look here, and he displayed the recovered treasure to the eyes of the astonished jeweller, exclaiming with great triumph, what say ye to that, Jingler? By my sceptre and crown, the man stares as if he took his native prince for a warlock, us that are the very malleus maleficarum, the contending and contriturating hammer of all witches, sorcerers, magicians, and the like. He thinks we are taking a touch of the black arts outsells, but gang thy way, honest Geordie, thou art a good plain man, but nane of the 7 sages of Greece, gang thy way, and mind the soothfast word which you spoke, small time sign that there is one in this land that comes near to Solomon, king of Israel, in all his gifts, except in his love to strange women, for by the daughter of Pharaoh. If Harriet was surprised at seeing the jewels so unexpectedly produced at the moment the king was upbraiding him for the loss of them, this allusion to the reflection which had escaped him while conversing with Lord Glenvarloch altogether completed his astonishment, and the king was so delighted with the superiority which it gave him at the moment that he rubbed his hands, chuckled, and finally, his sense of dignity giving way to the full feeling of triumph, he threw himself into his easy chair and laughed with unconstrained violence till he lost his breath and the tears ran plentifully down his cheeks as he strove to recover it. Meanwhile the royal cachinnation was echoed out by a discordant and portentous laugh from behind the arras, like that of one who, little accustomed to give way to such emotions, feels himself at some particular impulse unable either to control or to modify his obstreperous mirth. Harriet turned his head with new surprise towards the place from which sounds so unfitting the presence of a monarch seemed to burst with such emphatic clamour. The king, too, somewhat sensible of the indecorum, rose up and wiped his eyes, and calling, Toddlery, come out of your den, he produced from behind the arras the length of Richard Maniples, still laughing with as unrestrained mirth as ever did gossip at a country christening. Wisht, man, said the king, ye need na nicker that gate like a cusser at a cup o' corn, e'en though it was a pleasing jest in our ain framing, and yet to see Jingling Geordie, that bawds himself so much the wiser than other folk, to see him, ha, 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 in the vein of Euclio apud Plautum, distressing himself to recover what was lying at his elbow, peril and terrii, accadai, quo carum, quo non carum, tene quem quis nescio nihil video. Ah, Geordie, your e'en are sharp enough to look after goud and silver, gems, rubies, and the like of that, and yet ye kenna how to come by them when they are lost. Ay, look at them, man, look at them. They are aright and tight, sound and round, not a doublet crept in amongst them. George Heriot, when his first surprise was over, was too old a courtier to interrupt the king's imaginary triumph, although he darted a look at some displeasure at honest Ritchie, who still continued on what is usually termed the broad grin. He quietly examined the stones, and finding them all perfect, he honestly and sincerely congratulated his majesty on the recovery of a treasure which could not have been lost without some dishonour to the crown, and asked to whom he himself was to pay the sums for which they had been pledged, observing that he had the money by him in readiness. Ye are in a devil of a hurry when there is paying in the case, Geordie, said the king. What's the haste, man? The jewels were restored by an honest, kindly countryman of ours. There he stands, and moi kens if he wants the money on the nail, or if he might not be as weel pleased wi' a bit rescript on our treasury some 6 months hence. Ye ken that our exchequer is even at a low ebb just now, and ye cry pay, 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 as if we had all the mines of Ophir. Please your majesty, said Harriet, if this man has the real right to these moneys, it is doubtless at his will to grant forbearance if he will, but when I remember the guise in which I first saw him, with a tattered cloak and a broken head, I can hardly conceive it. Are not you Richie Maniples with the king's favour? Even say, Master Harriet, of the ancient and honourable house of Castle Collett, near to the Westport of Edinburgh, answered Ritchie. Why, please your majesty, he is a poor serving man, said Harriet. This money can never be honestly at his disposal. What for no, said the king. Why d'ye have naebody sprakel up the bray but yoursel, Geordie? Your ain cloak was thin enough when ye came here, though ye have lined it gay and weel, and for serving men there has mony a red shank cam over the tweed wi' his master's wallet on his shoulders, and thou rustles it wi' his 6 followers behind him. There stands the man himself, spirit him, Geordie. His may not be the best authority in the case, answered the cautious citizen. Tut, man, said the king, ye are over scrupulous. The knave deer stealers have an apt phrase, non est inquirendum unde winnet venison. He that brings the goods hath surely a right to dispose of the gear. Hark ye, friends, speak the truth and shame the deal. Have ye plenary powers to dispose on the redemption money, as to delay of payments, or the like, aye or no? Full power, and it like your gracious majesty, answered Richie Meniples, and I am maist willing to subscribe to whatsoever may in ony wise accommodate your majesty anent the redemption money, trusting your majesty's grace will be kind to me in one small favour. Ay, man, said the king, come ye to me there. I thought ye would e'en be like the rest of them. One would think our subjects' lives and goods were all our ain, and holden of us at our free will. But when we stand in need of ony matter of siller from them, which chances more frequently than we would it did, deal of bottle is to be had, save on the old terms of gift-gaff. It is just niffer for niffer. A weel neighbour, what is it that ye want? Some monopoly, I reckon, or it may be a grant of kirklands and teians, or a knighthood, or the like. Ye maun be reasonable, unless ye propose to advance more money for our present occasions. My liege, answered Richie Meniples, the owner of these moneys places them at your majesty's command, free of all pledge or usage, as long as it is your royal pleasure, providing your majesty will condescend to show some favour to the noble Lord Glenvarloch, presently prisoner in your royal Tower of London. How, man, how, man, how, man, exclaimed the king, reddening and stammering, but with emotions more noble than those by which he was sometimes agitated. What is that you dare to say to us? Sell our justice, sell our mercy, and we a crowned king, sworn to do justice to our subjects in the gate, and responsible for our stewardship to him that is over all kings. Here he reverently looked up, touched his bonnet, and continued with some sharpness, we dare not traffic in such commodities, sir, and but that ye are a poor ignorant creature that have done us this day some not unpleasant service, we wad have a red iron driven through your tongue in terrorem of others. Away with him, Geordie, pay him plack and bawbee out of our moneys in your hands, and let them care that come a hint. Richie, who had counted with the utmost certainty upon the success of this master stroke of policy, was like an architect whose whole scaffolding at once gives way under him. He caught, however, at what he thought might break his fall. Not only the sum for which the jewels were pledged, he said, but the double of it, if required, should be placed at his majesty's command, and even without hope or condition of repayment, if only. But the king did not allow him to complete the sentence, crying out with greater vehemence than before, as if he dreaded the stability of his own good resolutions. Away with him, Swith, away with him. It is time he were gane, if he doubles his bode that gate, and for your life, let not Stina or ony of them hear a word from his mouth, for wha kens what trouble that might bring me into. Ne inducus in tentationem, vade retro Sathanas. Amen. In obedience to the royal mandate, George Heriot hurried the abashed petitioner out of the presence and out of the palace, and when they were in the palace yard, the citizen, remembering with some resentment the airs of equality which Richie had assumed towards him in the commencement of the scene which had just taken place, could not forbear to retaliate by congratulating him with an ironical smile on his favourite court and his improved grace, and presenting a supplication. Never fash your beard about that, Master George Heriot, said Richie, totally undismayed, but tell me when and where I am to supplicate you for 800 pounds sterling, for which these jewels stood engaged. The instant that you bring with you the real owner of the money, replied Heriot, whom it is important that I should see on more accounts than one. Then will I back to his majesty, said Richie Meniples stoutly, and get either the money or the pledge back again. I am fully commissionate to act in that matter. It may be so, Richie, said the citizen, and perchance it may not be so neither, for your tales are not all gospel, and therefore be assured I will see that it is so, ere I pay you that large sum of money. I shall give you an acknowledgment for it, and I will keep it prestable at a moment's warning. But my good Richard Meniples of Castle Collop, near the west port of Edinburgh, in the meantime, I am bound to return to his majesty in matters of weight. So speaking, and mounting the stair to re-enter the palace, he added, by way of summing up the whole, George Heriot is over old a cock to be caught with jab. Richie stood petrified when he beheld him re-enter the palace, and found himself, as he supposed, left in the lurch. Now plague on ye, he muttered, for a cunning old skinflint, that because ye are an honest man yourself, forsooth, must needs deal with all the world as if they were knaves. But deal be in me if ye beat me yet. Good guide us, yonder comes Laurie Linklater next, and he will be on me about the supplication. I winna stand him, by St. Andrew. So saying, and changing the haughty stride with which he had that morning entered the precincts of the palace into a skulking shamble, he retreated for his wherry, which was in attendance, with speed which, to use the approved phrase on such occasions, greatly resembled a flight. End of chapter 31. Section 34 of The Fortunes of Nigel by Sir Walter Scott. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 32. Benedict. This looks not like a nuptial. Much ado about nothing. Master George Heriot had no sooner returned to the king's apartment than James inquired of Maxwell if the Earl of Huntingdon was in attendance, and receiving an answer in the affirmative, desired that he should be admitted. The old Scottish lord having made his reverence in the usual manner, the king extended his hand to be kissed, and then began to address him in a tone of great sympathy. We told your lordship in our secret epistle of this morning, written with our ain hand in testimony, we have neither pretermitted nor forgotten your faithful service, that we had that to communicate to you that would require both patience and fortitude to endure, and therefore exhorted you to peruse some of the most pithy passages of Seneca and of Boethius de Consolatione, that the back may be, as we say, fitted for the burden. This we commend to you from our ain experience. Non ignara male miseras sacrari disco, saith Dido, and I might say, in my own person, non ignaris. But to change the gender would affect the prosody, whereof our southern subjects are tenacious. So, my lord of Huntingdon, I trust you have acted by our advice and studied patience before ye need it, when niente occurrite morbo, mix the medicament when the disease is coming on. May it please your majesty, answered Lord Huntingdon, I'm more of an old soldier than a scholar, and if my own rough nature will not bear me out in any calamity, I hope I shall have grace to try a text of Scripture to boot. Ay, man, are you there with your bears? Said the king. The Bible man, touching his cap, is indeed principium et fons, but it is pity your lordship cannot peruse it in the original. For although we did ourselves promote that work of translation, since ye may read at the beginning of every Bible, that when some palpable clouds of darkness were thought like to have overshadowed the land, after the setting of that bright occidental star Queen Elizabeth, yet our appearance, like that of the sun in his strength, instantly dispelled these surmised mists. I say that, although, as therein mentioned, we countenance the preaching of the gospel, and especially the translation of the Scriptures out of the original sacred tongues, yet nevertheless we ourselves confess to have found a comfort in consulting them in the original Hebrew, whilk we do not perceive even in the Latin version of the Septuagint, much less in the English traduction. Please your majesty, said Lord Huntingdon, if your majesty delays communicating the bad news with which your honoured letter threatens me, until I am capable to read Hebrew like your majesty, I fear I shall die in ignorance of the misfortune which has befallen, or is about to befall my house. You will learn it but too soon, my lord, replied the king. I grieve to say it, but your son Dalgarno, whom I thought a very saint, as he was so much with Steenie and baby Charles, hath turned out a very villain. Villain, repeated Lord Huntingdon, and though he instantly checked himself, and added, but it is your majesty speaks the word, the effect of his first tone made the king step back as if he had received a blow. He also recovered himself again, and said in the pettish way which usually indicated his displeasure, Yes, my lord, it was we that said it. Non surdo canis, we are not deaf. We pray you not to raise your voice and speech with us. There is the bonny memorial. Read and judge for yourselves. The king then thrust into the old nobleman's hand a paper containing the story of the Lady Hermione, with the evidence by which it was supported, detailed so briefly and clearly that the infamy of Lord Dalgarno the lover by whom she had been so shamefully deceived, seemed undeniable. But her father yields not up so easily the cause of his son. "May it please your majesty," he said, "why was this tale not sooner told? This woman hath been here for years. Wherefore was the claim on my son not made the instant she touched English ground?" "Tell him how that came about, Geordie," said the king, dressing Harriet. "I grieve to distress my Lord Huntingdon," said Harriet, "but I must speak the truth. For a long time the Lady Hermione could not brook the idea of making her situation public, and when her mind became changed in that particular, it was necessary to recover the evidence of the false marriage, and letters and papers connected with it, which, when she came to Paris, and just before I saw her, she had deposited with a correspondent of her father in that city. He became afterwards bankrupt, and in consequence of that misfortune the lady's papers passed into other hands, and it was only a few days since I traced and recovered them. Without these documents of evidence, it would have been imprudent for her to have preferred her complaint, favoured as Lord Dalgarno is by powerful friends." "Ye are saucy to say, said the king. "I ken what ye mean weel enough. Ye think Steenie wad hae putten the weight of his foot into the scales of justice, and guard them homel the bucket. Ye forget, Geordie, what it is whose hand upholds them, and ye do poor Steenie the mair wrang, for he confessed it ance before us in our privy council that Dalgarno would have put the queen aff on him, the pure simple bairn, making him trow that she was a light of love, in woke mind he remained assured even when he parted from her, albeit Steenie might hae weel thought ane of they cattle wadna hae resisted the like of him." "The Lady Hermione," said George Harriet, "has always done the utmost justice to the conduct of the Duke, who, although strongly possessed with prejudice against her character, yet scorned to avail himself of her distress, and on the contrary supplied her with the means of extricating herself from her difficulties." "It was e'en like himsel', blessings on his bonny face," said the king, "and I believe this lady's tale the mair readily, my Lord Huntingdon, that she spake nae ill of Steenie. And to make a lang tale short, my lord, it is the opinion of our council and ourself as weel as of baby Charles and Steenie, that your son maun amend his wrong by wedding this lady, or undergo such disgrace and discountenance as we can bestow." The person to whom he spoke was incapable of answering him. He stood before the king, motionless, and glaring with eyes of which even the lids seemed immovable, as if suddenly converted into an ancient statue of the times of chivalry, so instantly had his hard features and strong limbs been arrested into rigidity by the blow he had received. And in a second afterwards, like the same statue when the lightning breaks upon it, he sunk at once to the ground with a heavy groan. The king was in the utmost alarm, called upon Harriet and Maxwell for help, and presence of mind not being his forte, ran to and fro in his cabinet, exclaiming, "My ancient and beloved servant, who saved our anointed self, way atque dolor. My Lord of Huntingdon, look up, man, and your son may marry the Queen of Sheba if he will." By this time Maxwell and Harriet had raised the old nobleman and placed him on a chair, while the king, observing that he began to recover himself, continued his consolations more methodically. "Haud up your head, and listen to your ain kind native prince. If there is shame, man, it comesna empty-handed. There is siller to gild it, a good tocher, and no that bad a pedigree. If she has been a loon, it was your son made her say, and he can make her an honest woman again." These suggestions, however reasonable in the common case, gave no comfort to Lord Huntingdon, if indeed he fully comprehended them. But the blubbering of his good-natured old master, which began to accompany and interrupt his royal speech, produced more rapid effect. The large tear gushed reluctantly from his eye, as he kissed the withered hands which the king, weeping with less dignity and restraint, abandoned to him, first alternately and then both together, until the feelings of the man getting entirely the better of the sovereign's sense of dignity, he grasped and shook Lord Huntingdon's hands with the sympathy of an equal and a familiar friend. Compone lacrimus, said the monarch. Be patient, man, be patient. The council and baby Charles and Steenie may a gang to the devil. He shall not marry her, since it moves you so deeply. He shall marry her, by God, answered the earl, drawing himself up, dashing the tear from his eyes, and endeavouring to recover his composure. I pray your majesty's pardon, but he shall marry her, with her dishonour for her dowry, were she the veriest courtesan in all Spain. If he gave his word, he shall make his word good. Were it to the meanest creature that haunts the streets, he shall do it, or my own dagger shall take the life that I gave him. If he could stoop to use so base a fraud, though to deceive infamy, let him wed infamy. No, no, the monarch continued to insinuate, things are not so bad as that. Steenie himself never thought of her being a street walker, even when he thought the worst of her. If it can at all console my Lord of Huntingdon, said the citizen, I can assure him of this lady's good birth and most fair and unspotted fame. I'm sorry for it, said Lord Huntingdon. Then interrupting himself, he said, Heaven forgive me for being ungrateful for such comfort, but I'm well nigh sorry she should be, as you represent her, so much better than the villain deserves, to be condemned to wed beauty and innocence and honest birth. Ay, and wealth, my lord, wealth, insinuated the king, is a better sentence than his perfidy has deserved. It is long, said the embittered father, since I saw he was selfish and hard-hearted, but to be a perjured liar, I never dreaded that such a blot would have fallen on my race. I will never look on him again. Hoot I, my lord, hoot I, said the king. Ye maun tak him to task roundly. I grant you should speak more in the vein of Demea than Bitio. We numpe et via per vulgata patrum. But as for not seeing him again, and he your only son, that is altogether out of reason. I tell you, man, but I would not for a bottle that baby Charles heard me, that he might gie the glaiks to half the lasses of Lunnon, ere I could find in my heart speak such harsh words as you have said of this deal of a Dalgarno of yours. May it please your majesty to permit me to retire, said Lord Huntingdon, and dispose of the case according to your own royal sense of justice, for I desire no favour for him. Aweel, my lord, so be it, and if your lordship can think, added the monarch, of anything in our power which might comfort you. Your majesty's gracious sympathy, said Lord Huntingdon, has already comforted me as far as earth can. The rest must be from the King of Kings. To him I commend you, my old and faithful servant, said James with emotion, as the earl withdrew from his presence. The king remained fixed in thought for some time, and then said to Harriet, Jingling, Geordie, ye ken all the privy doings of our court, and have doon so these 30 years, though, like a wise man, ye hear and see, and say nothing. Now there is a thing I fain wad ken, in the way of philosophical inquiry. Did you ever hear of the Umquhile, Lady Huntingdon, the departed countess of this noble earl, ganging a wee bit gleed in her walk through the world? I mean in the way of slipping a foot, casting a legland girth, or the like, ye understand me? On my word, as an honest man, said George Heriot, somewhat surprised at the question. I never heard her wronged by the slightest breath of suspicion. She was a worthy lady, very circumspect in her walk, and lived in great concord with her husband, save that the good countess was something of a Puritan, and kept more company with ministers than was altogether agreeable to Lord Huntingdon, who is, as your majesty well knows, a man of the old rough world that will drink and swear. O Geordie, exclaimed the king, these are old world frailties, of whilk we dare not pronounce even ourselves absolutely free, but the world grows worse from day to day, Geordie. The juveniles of this age may weel say with the poet, Aetas parentum pejor avis tulit nos nequi oris. This Dalgarno does not drink so much or swear so much as his father, but he wenches, Geordie, and he breaks his word and oath baith. As to what you say of the leady and the ministers, we are fallible creatures, Geordie, priests and kings, as weel as others, and what kens but what that may account for the difference between this Dalgarno and his father? The earl is the very soul of honour, and cares nae mair for war's gear than a noble hound for the quest of a foul mart. But as for his son, he was like to brazen us out ourselves, Steenie, baby Charles, and our council, till he heard of the tucker, and then by my kingly crown he lapped like a cock at a grossart. These are discrepancies betwixt parent and son not to be accounted for naturally, according to Baptista Porta, Michael Scott de Secretus, and others. Ah, jingling Geordie, if you were clouting the cauldron, and jingling on pots, pans, and vessels of all manner of metal, hadn't have jingled your grammar out over your head, I could have touched on that matter to you at mair length. Harry was too plain spoken to express much concern for the loss of his grammar learning on this occasion, but after modestly hinting that he had seen many men who could not fill their father's bonnet, though no one had been suspected of wearing their father's nightcap, he inquired whether Lord Dalgarno had consented to do the Lady Hermione justice. Troth, man, I have small doubt that he will, quoth the king. I gave him the schedule of her worldly substance, which you delivered to us in the council, and we allowed him half an hour to chew the cud upon that. It is rare reading for bringing him to reason. I left baby Charles and Steenie, laying his duty before him, and if he can resist doing what they desire him, why, I wish he would teach me the gait of it. Oh, Geordie, jingling Geordie, it was grand to hear baby Charles laying down the guilt of dissimulation, and Steenie lecturing on the turpitude of incontinence. I'm afraid, said George Eliot Harriet, more hastily than prudently, I might have thought of the old proverb of Satan reproving sin. Deal hey our Saul, neighbour, said the king, reddening, but ye are not blate. I gie ye license to speak freely, and by our soul, ye do not let the privilege become loss non utenda. It will suffer no negative prescription in your hands. Is it fit, think ye, that baby Charles should let his thoughts be publicly seen? No, no, prince's thoughts are arcana imperii, qui nescit dissimulari, nescit regnari. Every liege subject is bound to speak the whole truth to the king, but there is nae reciprocity of obligation, and for Steenie, having been whiles a dyke looper at a time, is it for you, who are his goldsmith, and to whom I doubt he owes an uncommodable sum, to cast that up to him? Harry did not feel himself called on to play the part of Zeno, and sacrifice himself for upholding the cause of moral truth. He did not desert it, however, by disavowing his words, but simply expressed sorrow for having offended his majesty, with which the placable king was sufficiently satisfied. And now, Geordie man, quoth he, we will to this culprit and hear what he has to say for himself, for I will see the job cleared this blessed day. Ye maun come wi' me, for your evidence may be wanted. The king led the way, accordingly, into a larger apartment, where the prince, the Duke of Buckingham, and one or two privy councillors were seated at a table, before which stood Lord Dalgarno in an attitude of as much elegant ease and indifference as could be expressed, considering the stiff dress and manners of the times. All rose and bowed reverently, while the king, to use a north country word expressive of his mode of locomotion, toddled to his chair or throne, making a sign to Harriet to stand behind him. We hope, said his majesty, that Lord Dalgarno stands prepared to do justice to this unfortunate lady, and to his own character and honour. May I humbly inquire the penalty, said Lord Dalgarno, in case I should unhappily find compliance with your majesty's demands impossible. Banishment frae our court, my lord, said the king, frae our court and our countenance. Unhappy exile that I may be, said Lord Dalgarno, in a tone of subdued irony, I will at least carry your majesty's picture with me, for I shall never see such another king. And banishment, my lord, said the prince sternly, from these our dominions. That must be thy form of law, please your royal highness, said Dalgarno, with an affectation of deep respect, and I have not heard that there is a statute compelling us, under such penalty, to marry every woman we may play the fool with. Perhaps his grace of Buckingham can tell me. You are a villain, Dalgarno, said the haughty and vehement favourite. Fie, my lord, fie, to a prisoner, and in presence of your royal and paternal gossip, said Lord Dalgarno, but I will cut this deliberation short. I've looked over this schedule of the goods and effects of Erminia Pauletti, daughter of the late noble. Yes, he is called the noble, or I read wrong, Giovanni Pauletti, of the house of Sansovino in Genoa, and of the no less noble Lady Maud Oliphant, of the house of Glenvarloch. Well, I declare that I was pre-contracted in Spain to this noble lady, and there is passed betwixt us some certain prelibatio matrimonii. And now what more does this grave assembly require of me? That you should repair the gross and infamous wrong you have done the lady by marrying her within this hour, said the prince. Oh, may it please your royal highness, answered Dalgarno, I have a trifling relationship with an old earl who calls himself my father, who may claim some vote in the matter. Alas, every son is not blessed with an obedient parent. He hazarded a slight glance towards the throne to give meaning to his last words. We have spoken ourselves with Lord Huntingdon, said the king, and are authorized to consent in his name. I could never have expected this intervention of a proxeneta, which the vulgar translate Blackfoot, of such eminent dignity, said Dalgarno, scarce concealing a sneer. And my father hath consented. He was wont to say, ere we left Scotland, that the blood of Huntingdon and of Glenvarloch would not mingle, were they poured into the same basin. Perhaps he has a mind to try the experiment. My lord, said James, we will not be longer trifled with. Will you instantly, and sine mora, take this lady to your wife in our chapel? Statim atque instanter, answered Lord Dalgarno, for I perceive by doing so I shall obtain power to render great services to the Commonwealth. I shall have acquired wealth to supply the wants of your Majesty, and a fair wife to be at the command of his Grace of Buckingham. The Duke rose, passed to the end of the table where Lord Dalgarno was standing, and whispered in his ear, You have placed a fair sister at my command ere now. This taunt cut deep through Lord Dalgarno's assumed composure. He started as if an adder had stung him, but instantly composed himself, and fixing on the Duke's still smiling countenance an eye which spoke unutterable hatred, he pointed the forefinger of his left hand to the hilt of his sword, but in a manner which could scarce be observed by any one save Buckingham. The Duke gave him another smile of bitter scorn, and returned to his seat, in obedience to the commands of the king, who continued calling out, Sit down, Steenie, sit down, I command ye. We will hae nae harms breaking here. Your Majesty needs not fear my patience, said Lord Dalgarno, and that I may keep it the better, I will not utter another word in this presence, save those enjoined to me in that happy portion of the prayer book which begins with Dearly beloved, and ends with amazement. You are a hardened villain, Dalgarno, said the king, and were I the lass, by my father Saul, I would rather brook the stain of having been your concubine than run the risk of becoming your wife. But she shall be under our special protection. Come, my lords, we will ourselves see this blithesome bridal. He gave the signal by rising, and moved towards the door, followed by the train. Lord Dalgarno attended, speaking to none, and spoken to by no one, yet seeming as easy and unembarrassed in his gait and manner as if in reality a happy bridegroom. They reached the chapel by a private entrance which communicated from the royal apartment. The Bishop of Winchester, in his pontifical dress, stood beside the altar, on the other side supported by Mona Paula, the colourless, faded, half-lifeless form of the Lady Hermione, or Erminia Pauletti. Lord Dalgarno bowed profoundly to her, and the prince, observing the horror with which she regarded him, walked up and said to her with much dignity, Madam, ere you put yourself under the authority of this man, let me inform you he hath in the fullest degree vindicated your honour, so far as concerns your former intercourse. It is for you to consider whether you will put your fortune and happiness into the hands of one who has shown himself unworthy of all trust. The lady with much difficulty found words to make reply. I owe to his Majesty's goodness, she said, the care of providing me some reservation out of my own fortune for my decent sustenance. The rest cannot be better disposed than in buying back the fair fame of which I am deprived, and the liberty of ending my life in peace and seclusion. The contract has been drawn up, said the king, under our own eye, specially discharging the potestas maritalis, and agreeing they shall live separate. So buckle them, my lord bishop, as fast as you can, that they may sunder again the sooner. The bishop accordingly opened his book and commenced the marriage ceremony under circumstances so novel and so inauspicious. The responses of the bride were only expressed by inclinations of the head and body, while those of the bridegroom were spoken boldly and distinctly, with a tone resembling levity, if not scorn. When it was concluded, Lord Dalgarno advanced as if to salute the bride, but seeing that she drew back in fear and abhorrence, he contented himself with making her a low bow. He then drew up his form to its height and stretched himself, as if examining the power of his limbs, but elegantly and without any forcible change of attitude. I could caper yet, he said, though I am in fetters, but they are of gold and lightly worn. Well, I see, all eyes look cold on me, and it is time I should withdraw. The sun shines elsewhere than in England, but first I must ask how this fair Lady Dalgarno is to be bestowed. Methinks it is but decent I should know. Is she to be sent to the harem of my Lord Duke, or is this worthy citizen as before? Hold thy tongue, Ribble. Hold thy base, ribald tongue, said his father, Lord Huntingdon, who had kept in the background during the ceremony, and now stepping suddenly forward, caught the lady by the arm, and confronted her unworthy husband. The Lady Dalgarno, he continued, shall remain as a widow in my house. A widow, I esteem her as much as if the grave had closed over her dishonoured husband. Lord Dalgarno exhibited momentary symptoms of extreme confusion, and said in a submissive tone, If you, my lord, can wish me dead, I cannot, though your heir returned the compliment. Few of the firstborn of Israel, he added, recovering himself from the single touch of emotion he had displayed, can say so much with truth, but I will convince you ere I go that I am a true descendant of a house famed for its memory of injuries. I marvel your majesty will listen to him longer, said Prince Charles. Methinks we have heard enough of his daring insolence. But James, who took the interest of a true gossip in such a scene as was now passing, could not bear to cut the controversy short, but imposed silence on his son with Wisht, baby Charles, there is a good bairn, Wisht. I want to hear what the frontless loon can say. Only, sir, said Dalgarno, that, but for one single line in this schedule, all else that it contains could not have bribed me to take that woman's hand into mine. That line maun have been the summa totalis, said the king. Not so, sire, replied Dalgarno. The sum total might indeed have been an object for consideration even to a Scottish king at no very distant period, but it would have had little charms for me, save that I see here an entry which gives me the power of vengeance over the family of Locke, and learn from it that yonder pale bride, when she put the wedding torch into my hand, gave me the power of burning her mother's house to ashes. How is that? Said the king. What is he speaking about, jingling Geordie? This friendly citizen, my liege, said Lord Dalgarno, hath expended a sum belonging to my lady, and now I thank heaven to me in acquiring a certain mortgage or wanset over the estate of Glenvarloch, which, if it be not redeemed before tomorrow at noon, will put me in possession of the fair domains of those who once called themselves our house's rivals. Can this be true? Said the king. It is even but too true, please your majesty, answered the citizen. The Lady Hermione having advanced the money for the original creditor, I was obliged in honour and honesty to take the rights to her, and doubtless they passed to her husband. But the warrant, man, said the king, the warrant on our exchequer, could not that supply the lad with the means of redemption? Unhappily, my liege, he has lost it, or disposed of it. It is not to be found. He is the most unlucky youth. This is a proper spot of work, said the king, beginning to amble about, and play with the points of his doublet and hose, in expression of dismay. We cannot aid him without paying our debts twice over, and we have, in the present state of our exchequer, scarce the means of paying them once. You have told me news, said Lord Dalgarno, but I will take no advantage. Do not, said his father, be a bold villain, since thou must be one, and seek revenge with arms, and not with the usurer's weapons. Pardon me, my lord, said Lord Dalgarno. Pen and ink are now my surest means of vengeance. and more land is won by the lawyer with the ram skin than by the Andrea Ferrara with his sheep's head handle. But as I said before, I will take no advantages. I will await in town tomorrow, near Covent Garden. If anyone will pay the redemption money to my scrivener, with whom the deeds lie, the better for Lord Glenvarloch. If not, I will go forward on the next day, and travel with all dispatch to the north to take possession. Take a father's malison with you, unhappy wretch, said Lord Huntingdon. And a king's, who is pater patriae, said James. I trust to bear both lightly, said Lord Dalgarno, and bowing around him he withdrew, while all present, oppressed and as it were overawed by his determined effrontery, found they could draw breath more freely when he at length relieved them of his society. Lord Huntingdon, applying himself to comfort his new daughter-in-law, withdrew with her also, and the king, with his privy council, whom he had not dismissed, again returned to his council-chamber, though the hour was unusually late. Harriet's attendance was still commanded, but for what reason was not explained to them. End of section 34. Section 35 of The Fortunes of Nigel by Sir Walter Scott. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 33. I'll play the eavesdropper. Richard III, Act 5, Scene 3. James had no sooner resumed his seat at the council board than he began to hitch in his chair, cough, use his handkerchief, and make other intimations that he meditated a long speech. The council composed themselves to the beseeming degree of attention. Charles, as strict in his notions of decorum as his father was indifferent to it, fixed himself in an attitude of rigid and respectful attention, while the haughty favourite, conscious of his power over both father and son, stretched himself more easily on his seat, and in assuming an appearance of listening, seemed to pay a debt to ceremonial rather than to duty. I doubt not, my lord, said the monarch, that some of you may be thinking the hour of refection is past, and that it is time to ask, with the slave in the comedy, quid de symbolo. Nevertheless, to do justice and exercise judgment is our meat and drink, and now we are to pray your wisdom to consider the case of this unhappy youth, Lord Glenvarloch, and see whether, consistently with our honour, anything can be done in his favour. I'm surprised at your Majesty's wisdom making the inquiry, said the Duke. It is plain this Dalgarno hath proved one of the most insolent villains on earth, and it must therefore be clear that if Lord Glenvarloch had run him through the body, there would but have been out of the world a knave who had lived in it too long. I think Lord Glenvarloch hath had much wrong, and I regret that, by the persuasions of this false fellow, I have myself had some hand in it. Ye speak like a child, Steenie. I mean my Lord of Buckingham, answered the king. It is one that does not understand the logic of the schools, for an action may be inconsequential or even meritorious, quod hominem, that is, as touching him upon whom it is acted, and yet most criminal, quod locum, or considering the place wherein it is done, as a man may lawfully dance, crity beardy, or any other dance, in a tavern, but not inter paritas ecclesiae. So that though it may have been a good deed to have sticked Lord Dalgarno, being such as he has shown himself anywhere else, yet it fell under the plain statute, when violence was offered within the verge of the court. For let me tell you, my lords, the statute against striking would be of no small use in our court, if it could be eluded by justifying the person stricken to be a knave. It is much to be lamented that I ken nae court in Christendom where knaves are not to be found, and if men are to break the peace under pretence of beating them, why it will rain Jedart staves in our very antechamber. What your Majesty says, replied Prince Charles, is marked with your usual wisdom. The precincts of palaces must be sacred, as well as the persons of kings. which are respected even in the most barbarous nations, as being one step only beneath their divinities. But your Majesty's will can control the severity of this and every other law, and it is in your power, on consideration of his case, to grant the rash young man a free pardon. Rem acus testigisti Carola me purula, answered the king, and note, my lords, that we have, by a shrewd device and gift of our own, already sounded the very depth of this Lord Glenvarloch's disposition. I trow there be among you some that remember my handling in the curious case of my Lady Lake, and how I trimmed them about the story of hearkening behind the arras. Now this put me to cogitation, and I remembered me of having read that Dionysius, king of Syracuse, whom historians call Tyrannos, which signifieth not in the Greek tongue as in ours a truculent usurper, but a royal king who governs, it may be, something more strictly than we and other lawful monarchs, whom the ancients termed Basilius. Now this Dionysius of Syracuse caused cunning workmen to build for himself a lug. Do ye ken what that is, my lord bishop? A cathedral, I presume to guess, answered the bishop. What the deal, man? I crave your lordship's pardon for swearing, but it was no cathedral, only a lurking place called the King's Lug or Ear, where he could sit undescried and hear the converse of his prisoners. Now, sirs, in imitation of this Dionysius, whom I took for my pattern, the rather that he was a great linguist and grammarian, and taught a school with good applause, after his abdication, either he or his successor of the same name, it matters not whilk, I've caused them to make a lug up at the state prison of the tower yonder, more like a pulpit than a cathedral, my lord bishop, and communicating with the arras behind the lieutenant's chamber, where we may sit and privily hear the discourse of such prisoners as are pent up there for state offences, and so creep into the very secrets of our enemies. The prince cast a glance towards the duke, expressive of great vexation and disgust. Buckingham shrugged his shoulders, but the motion was so slight as to be almost imperceptible. Weel, my lord, ye ken the fray at the hunting this morning. I shall not get out of the trembling exercise until I have a sound night's sleep. Just after that they bring ye in a pretty page that had been found in the park. We were warned against examining him ourselves by the anxious care of those around us. Nevertheless, holding our life ever at the service of these kingdoms, we commanded all to avoid the room, the rather that we suspected this boy to be a girl. What think ye, my lords? Few of you would have thought I had a hawk's eye for sick gear, but we thank God that though we are old, we know so much of such stories as may beseem a man of decent gravity. Weel, my lords, we questioned this maiden in male attire ourselves, and I profess it was a very pretty interrogatory, and well followed. For though she at first professed that she assumed this disguise in order to countenance the woman who should present us with the Lady Hermione's petition, for whom she professed entire affection, yet when we, suspecting Anguis in Urba, did put her to the very question, she was compelled to own a virtuous attachment for Glenvarlochades, in such a pretty passion of shame and fear, that we had much ado to keep our own eyes from keeping company with hers in weeping. Also she laid before us the false practices of this Dalgarno towards Glenvarlochades, inveigling him into houses of ill resort, and giving him evil counsel under pretext of sincere friendship, whereby the inexperienced lad was led to do what was prejudicial to himself and offensive to us. But, however prettily she told her tale, we determined not altogether to trust to her narration, but rather to try the experiment whilk we had devised for such occasions. And having ourselves speedily passed from Greenwich to the Tower, we constituted ourselves eavesdropper, as it is called, to observe what should pass between Glenvarlochades and his page, whom we caused to be admitted to his apartment, Will judging that if they were of counsel together to deceive us, it could not be but something of it would spunk out. And what think ye we saw, my lords? Nathing for you to sniggle and laugh at, Steenie, for I question if you could have played the temperate and Christian-like part of this poor lad Glenvarloch. He might be a father of the church, in comparison of you, man. And then to try his patience yet farther, we loosed on him a courtier and a citizen, that is Sir Mungo Malagrother, and our servant George Heriot here, wha dang the poor lad about, and didna greatly spare our royal selves. You mind, Geordie, what you said about the wives and concubines, but I forgie ye, man, nae need of kneeling, I forgive ye, and readier that it regards a certain particular whilk, as it added not much to Solomon's credit, the like of it cannot be said to impinge on ours. A weal, my lords, for all temptation of sore distress and evil ensample, this poor lad never loosed his tongue on us to say one unbecoming word, which inclines us the rather, acting always by your wise advice, to treat this affair of the park as a thing done in the heat of blood and under strong provocation, and therefore to confer our free pardon on Lord Glenvarloch. I am happy your gracious majesty, said the Duke of Buckingham, has arrived at that conclusion, though I could never have guessed at the road by which you attained it. I trust, said Prince Charles, that it is not a path which your majesty will think it consistent with your high dignity to tread frequently. Never while I live again, baby Charles, that I give you my royal word on. They say that hearkeners hear ill tales of themselves. By my soul, my very ears are tingling with that old sorrow Sir Mungo's sarcasms. He called us close-fisted, Steenie. I'm sure you can contradict that, but it is mere envy in the old mutilated sinner, because he himself has neither a noble to hold in his loof, nor fingers to close on it if he had. Here the king lost recollection of Sir Mungo's irreverence in chuckling over his own wit, and only farther alluded to it by saying, we must give the old maunderer bos in linguam, something to stop his mouth, or he will rail at us from Dan to Beersheba. And now, my lords, let our warrant of mercy to Lord Glenvarloch be presently expedited, and he put to his freedom, and as his estate is likely to go so sleeveless a gait, we will consider what means of favour we can show him. My lords, I wish you an appetite to an early supper, for our labours have approached that term. Baby Charles and Steenie, you will remain till our couchee. My lord bishop, you will be pleased to stay to bless our meat. Geordie, Heriot, a word with you apart. His Majesty then drew the citizen into a corner, while the councillors, those excepted who had been commanded to remain, made their obeisance and withdrew. Geordie, said the king, my good and trusty servant, here he busied his fingers much with the points and ribbons of his dress, ye see that we have granted from our own natural sense of right and justice that which yon long-backed fallow, Maniples I think they call him, proffered to purchase from us with a mighty bribe, whilk we refused as being a crowned king, who would neither sell our justice nor our mercy for pecuniar consideration. Now what think ye should be the upshot of this? My Lord Glenvarloch's freedom, and his restoration to your majesty's favour, said Heriot. I ken that, said the king peevishly. Ye are very dull to-day. I mean, what do you think this fallow Maniples should think about the matter? Surely that your majesty is a most good and gracious sovereign, answered Heriot. We had need to be good and gracious baith, said the king, still more pettishly, that have idiots about us that cannot understand what we mint at, unless we speak it out in braid lowlands. See this shield Maniples, sir, and tell him what we have done for Lord Glenvarloch, in whom he takes such part out of our own gracious motion, though we refuse to do it on any proffer of private advantage. Now you may put it till him, as if of your own mind, whether it will be a gracious or a dutiful part in him to press us for present payment of the 200 or 300 miserable pounds for whilk we were obliged to pignorate our jewels. Indeed, mony men may think ye wad do the part of a good citizen, if you took it on yourself to refuse him payment, seeing he hath had what he professed to esteem full satisfaction, and considering moreover that it is evident he hath no pressing need of the money, whereof we have much necessity. George Heriot sighed internally. O my master, thought he, my dear master, is it then fated you are never to indulge any kingly or noble sentiment, without its being sullied by some afterthought of interested selfishness? The king troubled himself not about what he thought, but taking him by the collar said, Ye ken my meaning now, jingler, away wi' ye. You are a wise man, manage it your ain gait, but forget not our present straits. The citizen made his obeisance and withdrew. And now, baron, said the king, what do you look upon each other for? And what have you got to ask of your dear dad in gossip? Only, said the prince, that it would please your majesty to command the lurking place at the prison to be presently built up. The groans of a captive should not be brought in evidence against him. What? Build up my lug, baby Charles? And ye have better deaf than hear ill tales of oneself. So let them build it up, hard and fast, without delay. The rather that my back is sare with sitting in it for a whole hour. And now let us see what the cooks have been doing for us, bonny bairns. End of chapter 33. Section 36 of The Fortunes of Nigel by Sir Walter Scott. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 34. To this brave man the knight repairs for counsel in his law affairs, and found him mounted in his pew, with books and money placed for show, like nest eggs to make clients lay, and for his false opinion pay. Hudibras. Our readers may recollect a certain smooth-tongued, lank-haired, buckram-suited Scottish scrivener, who in the earlier part of this history appeared in the character of a protégé of George Heriot. It is to his house we are about to remove, but times have changed with him. The petty booth hath become a chamber of importance. The buckram suit is changed into black velvet, and although the wearer retains his puritanical humility and politeness to clients of consequence, he can now look others broad in the face, and treat them with a full allowance of superior opulence, and the insolence arising from it. It was but a short period that had achieved these alterations, nor was the party himself, as yet, entirely accustomed to them, but the change was becoming less embarrassing to him with every day's practice. Among other acquisitions of wealth you may see one of Davy Ramsay's best timepieces on the table, and his eye is frequently observing its revolutions, while a boy, whom he employs as a scribe, is occasionally sent out to compare its progress with the clock of St. Dunstan. The scrivener himself seemed considerably agitated. He took from a strong box a bundle of parchments, and read passages of them with great attention, then began to soliloquize. There is no outlet which law can suggest, no back door of evasion, none, if the lands of Glenvarloch are not redeemed before it rings noon. Lord Dalgarno has them a cheap pennyworth. Strange that he should have been at last able to set his patron at defiance, and achieve for himself the fair estate with the prospect of which he so long flattered the powerful Buckingham. Might not Andrew Scurley-Witter nick him as neatly? He hath been my patron, true, not more than Buckingham was his, and he can be so no more, for he departs presently for Scotland. I'm glad of it. I hate him, and I fear him. He knows too many of my secrets. I know too many of his. But no, 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 I need never attempt it. There are no means of overreaching him. Well, Willie, what o'clock? 11 hours. Just chapped, sir. Go to your desk without, child, said the scrivener. What to do next? I shall lose the old Earl's fair business, and what is worse, his son's foul practice. Old Harriet looks too close into business to permit me more than the paltry and ordinary dues. The Whitefriars business was profitable, but it has become unsafe ever since. Pa, what brought that in my head just now? I can hardly hold my pen. If men should see me in this way. Willie, calling aloud to the boy, a cup of distilled waters. So, now I could face the devil. He spoke the last words aloud, and close by the door of the apartment, which was suddenly opened by Richie Maniples, followed by 2 gentlemen, and attended by 2 porters bearing money-bags. "If ye can face the devil, Maester Skirly-Witter," said Ritchie, "ye will be the less likely to turn your back on a sack or tway o' siller, which I have ta'en the freedom to bring you. Sathanas and Mammon are near akin." The porters at the same time ranged their load on the floor. I, stammered the surprised scrivener, "I cannot guess what you mean, sir." "Only that I have brought you the redemption money on the part of Lord Glenvarloch, in discharge of a certain mortgage over his family inheritance. And here, in good time, comes Master Reginald Lowestoft and another honourable gentleman of the Temple to be witnesses to the transaction." I incline to think," said the scrivener, "that the term is expired." "You will pardon us, Master Scrivener," said Lowestoft. "You will not baffle us. It wants 3/4 of noon by every clock in the city." "I must have time, gentlemen," said Andrew, "to examine the gold by tale and weight." "Do so at your leisure, Master Scrivener," replied Lowestoft again. "We have already seen the contents of each sack told in weight, and we have put our seals on them. There they stand in a row, 20 in number, each containing 300 yellow hammers. We are witnesses to the lawful tender." "Gentlemen," said the scrivener, "this security now belongs to a mighty lord. I pray you abate your haste, and let me send for Lord Dalgarno, or rather I will run for him myself." So saying, he took up his hat, but Lowestoft called out, "Friend Meniples, keep the door fast, and thou beest the man. He seeks but to put off the time." "In plain terms, Andrew, you may send for the devil if you will, who is the mightiest lord of my acquaintance, but from hence you stir not till you have answered our proposition by rejecting or accepting the redemption money fairly tendered. There it lies, take it or leave it as you will. I have skill enough to know that the law is mightier than any lord in Britain. I've learned so much at the Temple, if I've learned nothing else, and see that you trifle not with it, lest it make your long ears an inch shorter, Master Skirly-Witter." "Nay, gentlemen, if you threaten me," said the scrivener, "I cannot resist compulsion." No threats at all, my little Andrew," said Lowestoft, "a little friendly advice only. Forget not, honest Andrew, I have seen you in Alsatia." Without answering a single word, the scrivener sat down and drew in proper form a full receipt for the money proffered. "I take it on your report, Master Lowestoft," he said. "I hope you will remember I have insisted neither upon weight nor tale. I have been civil. If there is deficiency, I shall come to loss." "Fill up his nose with a gold piece, Ritchie," quoth the Templar. "Take up the papers, and now wend we merrily to dine, thou wot'st where." "If I might choose," said Ritchie, "it should not be at yonder roguish ordinary, but as it is your pleasure, gentlemen, the treat shall be given wheresoever you will have it." "At the ordinary," said the one Templar. "At Beaujeu's," said the other. "It is the only house in London for neat wines, nimble drawers, choice dishes, and high charges," quoth Ritchie Meniples. "But as I said before, gentlemen, ye have a right to command me in this thing, having so frankly rendered me your service in this small matter of business, without other stipulation than that of a slight banquet." The latter part of this discourse passed in the street, where, immediately afterwards, they met Lord Dalgarno. He appeared in haste, touched his hat slightly to Master Lowestoft, who returned his reverence with the same negligence, and walked slowly on with his companion, while Lord Dalgarno stopped Ritchie Meniples with a commanding sign, which the instinct of education compelled Meniples, though indignant, to obey. "Whom do you now follow, sir?" demanded the noble. "Whomsoever goeth before me, my lord," answered Meniples. "No sauciness, you knave. I desire to know if you still serve Nigel Oliphant," said Dalgarno. "I am friend to the noble Lord Glenvarloch," answered Meniples with dignity. "True," replied Lord Dalgarno, "that noble lord has sunk to seek friends among lackeys. Nevertheless, hark thee hither. Nevertheless, if he be of the same mind as when we last met, thou mayest show him that on tomorrow at 4 afternoon I shall pass northward by Enfield Chase. I will be slenderly attended, as I design to send my train through Barnet. It is my purpose to ride an easy pace through the forest, and to linger a while by Camlet Moat. He knows the place, and if he be aught but an Alsatian bully, will think it fitter for some purposes than the park. He is, I understand, at liberty, or shortly to be so. If he fail me at the place nominated, he must seek me in Scotland, where he will find me possessed of his father's estates and lands. Humph, muttered Ritchie, there go 2 words to that bargain. He even meditated a joke on the means which he was conscious he possessed of baffling Lord Dalgarno's expectations, but there was something of keen and dangerous excitement in the eyes of the young nobleman which prompted his discretion for once to rule his wit, and he only answered, God grant your lordship may well brook your new conquest when you get it. I shall do your errand to my lord. Wilk is to say, he added internally, he shall never hear a word of it from Ritchie. I'm not the lad to put him in such hazard. Lord Dalgarno looked at him sharply for a moment, as if to penetrate the meaning of the dry, ironical tone which, in spite of Ritchie's awe, mingled with his answer, and then waved his hand in signal he should pass on. He himself walked slowly till the trio were out of sight, then turned back with hasty steps to the door of the scrivener, which he had passed in his progress, knocked, and was admitted. Lord Dalgarno found the man of law, with the money-bag still standing before him, and it escaped not his penetrating glance that Skirly-Witter was disconcerted and alarmed at his approach. How now, man, he said, what, hast thou not a word of oily compliment to me on my happy marriage, not a word of most philosophical consolation on my disgrace at court, or has my mien, as a wittol and discarded favourite, the properties of the Gorgon's head, the turbatae pallidus arma, as Majesty might say? My lord, I'm glad, my lord, I'm sorry, answered the trembling scrivener, who, aware of the vivacity of Lord Dalgarno's temper, dreaded the consequence of the communication he had to make to him. Glad and sorry, answered Lord Dalgarno, that is, blowing hot and cold with a witness. Hark ye, you picture of petty larceny personified, if you are sorry I am a cuckold. Remember, I am only mine own, you knave. There is too little blood in her cheeks to have sent her astray elsewhere. Well, I will bear mine antlered honours as I may. Gold shall gild them, and for my disgrace, revenge shall sweeten it. I revenge, and there strikes the happy hour. The hour of noon was accordingly heard to peal from St. Dunstan's. Well banged, brave hammers, said Lord Dalgarno in triumph. The estate and lands of Glenvarloch are crushed beneath these clanging blows. If my steel tomorrow prove but as true as your iron maces today, the poor landless lord will little miss what your peal hath cut him out from. The papers, thou varlet. I am tomorrow northward ho. At 4 afternoon I am bound to be at Camlet Moat in the Enfield chase. Tonight most of my retinue set forward. The papers, come, dispatch. My lord, the papers of the Glenvarloch mortgage, I have them not. Have them not? Echoed Lord Dalgarno. Hast thou sent them to my lodgings, thou varlet? Did I not say I was coming hither? What mean you by pointing to that money? What villainy have you done for it? It is too large to be come honestly by. Your lordship knows best, answered the scrivener, in great perturbation. The gold is your own. It is not the redemption money of the Glenvarloch estate, said Dalgarno. Dare not say it is, or I will, upon the spot, divorce your pettifogging soul from your carrion carcass. So saying, he seized the scrivener by the collar, and shook him so vehemently that he tore it from the cassock. My lord, I must call for help, said the trembling caitiff, who felt at that moment all the bitterness of the mortal agony. It was the law's act, not mine. What could I do? Dost ask? Why, thou snivelling dribbet of damnation, were all thy oaths, tricks, and lies spent? Or do you hold yourself too good to utter them in my service? Thou shouldst have lied, cozened, outsworn truth itself, rather than stood betwixt me and my revenge. But mark me, he continued, I know more of your pranks than would hang thee. A line from me to the Attorney General, and thou art sped. What would you have me to do, my lord? Said the scrivener. All that art and law can accomplish, I will try. Ah, are you converted? Do so, or pity of your life, said the lord. And remember, I never fail my word. Then keep that accursed gold, he continued. Or stay, I will not trust you. Send me this gold home presently to my lodging. I will still forward to Scotland, and it shall go hard but that I hold out Glenvarloch Castle against the owner by means of the ammunition he has himself furnished. Thou art ready to serve me. The scrivener professed the most implicit obedience. Then remember, the hour was past ere payment was tendered, and see thou hast witnesses of trusty memory to prove that point. Tush, my lord, I will do more, said Andrew, reviving. I will prove that Lord Glenvarloch's friends threatened, swaggered, and drew swords on me. Did your lordship think I was ungrateful enough to have suffered them to prejudice your lordship, save that they had bare swords at my throat? Enough said, replied Dalgarno. You are perfect. Mind that you continue so, as you would avoid my fury. I leave my page below. Get porters, and let them follow me instantly with the gold. So saying, Lord Dalgarno left the scrivener's habitation. Skirly-Witter, having dispatched his boy to get porters of trust for transporting the money, remained alone, and in dismay, meditating by what means he could shake himself free of the vindictive and ferocious nobleman who possessed at once a dangerous knowledge of his character and the power of exposing him where exposure would be ruin. He had indeed acquiesced in the plan, rapidly sketched, for obtaining possession of the ransomed estate, but his experience foresaw that this would be impossible, while on the other hand he could not anticipate the various consequences of Lord Dalgarno's resentment, without fears from which his sordid soul recoiled. To be in the power, and subject both to the humours and the extortions, of a spendthrift young lord, just when his industry had shaped out the means of fortune, it was the most cruel trick which fate could have played the incipient usurer. While the scrivener was in this fit of anxious anticipation, one knocked at the door of the apartment, and being desired to enter, appeared in the coarse riding cloak of uncut Wiltshire cloth, fastened by a broad leather belt and brass buckle, which was then generally worn by graziers and countrymen. Skirly-Witter, believing he saw in his visitor a country client who might prove profitable, had opened his mouth to request him to be seated, when the stranger, throwing back his frieze hood, which he had drawn over his face, showed the scrivener features well imprinted in his recollection, but which he never saw without a disposition to swoon. Is it you? He said faintly, as the stranger replaced the hood which concealed his features. Who else should it be? Said his visitor. Thou son of parchment, got betwixt the inkhorn and the stuffed process bag, that mayest call the pen thy father, and the ink thy mother, the wax thy brother, and the sand thy sister, and the good pillory thy cousin allied. Rise and do reverence unto me, thy better. Not yet down to the country, said the scrivener, after every warning. Do not think your grazier's cloak will bear you out, captain. No, nor your scraps of stage plays. Why, what would you have me to do, said the captain. Would you have me starve? If I am to fly, you must eke my wings with a few feathers. You can spare them, I think. You had means already. You have had 10 pieces. What has become of them? Gone, answered Captain Culpepper. Gone, no matter where. I had a mind to bite, and I was bitten, that's all. I think my hand shook at the thought of t'other night's work, for I trolled the doctors like a very baby. And you have lost all, then? Well, take this and be gone, said the scrivener. What, 2 poor smelts? Marry, plague of your bounty, but remember, you are as deep in as I. Not so, by heaven, answered the scrivener. I only thought of easing the old man of some papers and a trifle of his gold, and you took his life. Were he living, answered Culpepper, he would rather have lost it than his money. But that is not the question, Master Skirly-Witter. You undid the private bolts of the window when you visited him about some affairs on the day ere he died. So satisfy yourself that if I am taken, I will not swing alone. Pity Jack Hempsfield is dead. It spoils the old catch. And 3 merry men, and 3 merry men, and 3 merry men are we, as ever did sing 3 parts in a string, all under the triple tree. For God's sake, speak lower, said the scrivener. Is this a place or time to make your midnight catches heard? But how much will serve your turn? I tell you, I am but ill provided. You tell me a lie, then, said the bully, a most palpable and gross lie. How much do you say will serve my turn? Why, 1 of these bags will do for the present. I swear to you that these bags of money are not at my disposal. Not honestly, perhaps, said the captain, but that makes little difference betwixt us. I swear to you, continued the scrivener, they are in no way at my disposal. They have been delivered to me by tale. I am to pay them over to Lord Dalgarno, whose boy waits for them, and I could not skelder 1 piece out of them without risk of hue and cry. Can you not put off the delivery, said the bravo, his huge hand still fumbling with 1 of the bags, as if his fingers longed to close on it. Impossible, said the scrivener. He sets forward to Scotland tomorrow. Ay, said the bully, after a moment's thought. Travels he the north road with such a charge? He is well accompanied, added the scrivener. But what? Said the bravo. Nay, I meant nothing, said the scrivener. Thou hadst the wind of some good thing, replied Culpepper. I saw thee pause like a setting dog. Thou wilt say as little, and make as sure a sign, as a well-bred spaniel. All I meant to say, captain, was that his servants go by Barnet, and he himself with his page passed through Enfield Chase, and he spoke to me yesterday of riding a soft pace. Aha, comest thou to me there, my boy? And of resting, continued the scrivener, resting a space at Camlet Moat. Why, this is better than cock-fighting, said the captain. I see not how it can advantage you, captain, said the scrivener, but however they cannot ride fast, for his page rides the sumpter horse, which carries all that weight, pointing to the money on the table. Lord Dalgarno looks sharp to the world's gear. That horse will be obliged to those who may ease him of his burden, said the bravo, and egad he may be met with. He hath still that page, that same Luton, that goblin. Well, the boy hath set game for me ere now. I will be revenged too, for I owe him a grudge for an old score at the ordinary. Let me see, Black Feltham and Dick Shakebag. We shall want a fourth, I love to make sure, and the booty will stand parting besides what I can bucket them out of. Well, scrivener, lend me 2 pieces. Bravely done, nobly imparted. Give you good den. And wrapping his disguise closer around him, away he went. When he had left the room, the scrivener wrung his hands and exclaimed, More blood, more blood. I thought to have had done with it, but this time there was no fault with me, none, and then I shall have all the advantage. If this ruffian falls, there is truce with his tugs at my purse strings, and if Lord Dalgarno dies, as is most likely, for though as much afraid of cold steel as a dead of a dun, this fellow is a deadly shot from behind a bush, then am I in 1,000 ways safe, safe, safe. We willingly drop the curtain over him and his reflections. End of chapter 34. Section 37 of The Fortunes of Nigel by Sir Walter Scott. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 35. We are not worst at once. The course of evil begins so slowly, and from such slight source, an infant's hand might stem its breach with clay. But let the stream get deeper, and philosophy, aye, and religion too, shall strive in vain to turn the headlong torrent. Old play. The Templars had been regaled by our friend Richie Maniples in a private chamber at Beaujeurs, where he might be considered as good company, for he had exchanged his serving-man's cloak and jerkin for a grave yet handsome suit of clothes in the fashion of the times, but such as might have befitted an older man than himself. He had positively declined presenting himself at the ordinary, a point to which his companions were very desirous to have brought him, for it will be easily believed that such wags as Lowestoft and his companion were not indisposed to a little merriment at the expense of the raw and pedantic Scotsman, besides the chance of easing him of a few pieces, of which he appeared to have acquired considerable command, but not even a succession of measures of sparkling sack, in which the little brilliant atoms circulated like motes in the sun's rays, had the least effect on Ritchie's sense of decorum. He retained the gravity of a judge, even while he drank like a fish, partly from his own natural inclination to good liquor, partly in the way of good fellowship towards his guests. When the wine began to make some innovation on their heads, Master Lowestoft, tired, perhaps, of the humours of Ritchie, who began to become yet more stoically contradictory and dogmatical than even in the earlier part of the entertainment, proposed to his friend to break up their debauch and join the gamesters. The drawer was called accordingly, and Ritchie discharged the reckoning of the party with a generous remuneration to the attendants, which was received with cap and knee, and many assurances of kindly welcome, gentlemen. I grieve we should part so soon, gentlemen, said Ritchie to his companions, and I would you had cracked another quart ere you went, or stayed to take some slight matter of supper and a glass of Rhenish. I thank you, however, for having graced my poor collation thus far, and I commend you to fortune in your own courses, for the ordinary neither was, is, nor shall be an element of mine. Fare thee well, then, said Lowestoft, most sapient and sententious Master Maniples. May you soon have another mortgage to redeem, and may I be there to witness it, and may you play the good fellow as heartily as you have done this day. Nay, gentlemen, it is merely of your grace to say so, but if you would but hear me speak a few words of admonition respecting this wicked ordinary, Reserve the lesson, most honourable Ritchie, said Lowestoft, until I've lost all my money, showing at the same time a purse indifferently well provided, and then the lecture is likely to have some weight. And keep my share of it, Ritchie, said the other Templar, showing an almost empty purse in his turn, till this be full again, and then I will promise to hear you with some patience. Aye, gallant, said Ritchie, the full and the empty gang, a gate, and that is a grey one, but the time will come. Nay, it is come already, said Lowestoft. They have set out the hazard table. Since you will peremptorily not go with us, why, farewell, Ritchie. And farewell, gentlemen, said Ritchie, and left the house into which they had returned. Meniples was not many steps from the door, when a person whom, lost in his reflections on gaming, ordinaries, and the manners of the age, he had not observed, and who had been as negligent on his part, ran full against him, and when Ritchie desired to know whether he meant only incivility, replied by a curse on Scotland and all that belonged to it. A less round reflection on his country would at any time have provoked Ritchie, but more especially when he had a double quart of canary, and better in his pate. He was about to give a very rough answer, and to second his word by action, when a closer view of his antagonist changed his purpose. You are the very lad in the world, said Ritchie, whom I most wish to meet. And you, answered the stranger, or any of your beggarly countrymen, are the last sight I should ever wish to see. You Scots are ever fair and false, and an honest man cannot thrive within eye-shot of you. As to our poverty, friend, replied Ritchie, that is as heaven pleases. But touching our falsehood, I'll prove to you that a Scotsman bears as leal and true a heart to his friend as ever beat an English doublet. I care not whether he does or not, said the gallant. Let me go. Why keep you hold of my cloak? Let me go, or I will thrust you into the kennel. I believe I could forgie ye, for you did me a good turn once in plucking me out of it, said the Scot. But shrew my fingers then if they did so, replied the stranger. I would your whole country lay there along with you, and heaven's curse bite the hand that helped to raise them. Why do you stop my way? He added fiercely. Because it is a bad one, Master Jenkins, said Ritchie. Nay, never start about it, man. You see you are known. Alack-a-day, that an honest man's son should live to start at hearing himself called by his own name. Jenkins struck his brow violently with his clenched fist. Come, come, said Ritchie, this passion availeth nothing. Tell me what gate go you? To the devil, answered Jim Vin. That is a black gate if you speak according to the letter, answered Ritchie. But if metaphorically there are worse places in this great city than the Devil Tavern, and I care not if I go thither with you, and bestow a pottle of burnt sack on you, it will correct the crudities of my stomach, and form a gentle preparative for the leg of a cold pullet. I pray you in good fashion to let me go, said Jenkins. You may mean me kindly, and I wish you to have no wrong at my hand, but I am in the humour to be dangerous to myself or any one. I will abide the risk, said the Scot, if you will but come with me, and here is a place convenient, a half nearer than the Devil. Wilk is but an ill-omened, drouthy name for a tavern. This other of the St. Andrew is a quiet place, where I have ta'en my wetter now and then, when I lodged in the neighbourhood of the temple with Lord Glenvarloch. What the deal's the matter with the man? Guard him gee, sick a spang as that, and almaist brought himself for me on the causeway. Do not name that false Scots name to me, said Jinvin, if you would not have me go mad. I was happy before I saw him. He has been the cause of all the ill that has befallen me. He has made a knave and a madman of me. If you are a knave, said Ritchie, you have met an officer. If you are a daft, you have met a keeper, but a gentle officer and a kind keeper. Look you, my good friend, there has been 20 things said about this same lord, in which there is no more truth than in the leasings of Mahound. The worst they can say of him is that he is not always so amenable to good advice as I would pray him, you and every young man to be. Come with me, just come ye with me, and if a little spell of siller and a great deal of excellent counsel can relieve your occasions, all I can say is you have had the luck to meet one capable of giving you both, and maist willing to bestow them. The pertinacity of the Scot prevailed over the sullenness of Vincent, who was indeed in a state of agitation and incapacity to think for himself, which led him to yield the more readily to the suggestions of another. He suffered himself to be dragged into the small tavern, which Ritchie recommended, and where they soon found themselves seated in a snug niche, with a reeking pottle of burnt sack and a paper of sugar betwixt them. Pipes and tobacco were also provided, but were only used by Ritchie, who had adopted the custom of late, as adding considerably to the gravity and importance of his manner, and affording, as it were, a bland and pleasant accompaniment to the words of wisdom which flowed from his tongue. After they had filled their glasses and drank them in silence, Ritchie repeated the question whither his guest was going when they met so fortunately. "I told you," said Jenkins, "I was going to destruction. I mean to the gaming-house. I'm resolved to hazard these 2 or 3 pieces, to get as much as will pay for a passage with Captain Sharker, whose ship lies at Gravesend, bound for America, and so eastward ho. I met one devil in the way already, who would have tempted me from my purpose, but I spurned him from me. You may be another for what I know. What degree of damnation do you propose for me?" he added wildly, "and what is the price of it?" "I would have you to know," answered Ritchie, "that I deal in no such commodities, whether as buyer or seller, but if you will tell me honestly the cause of your distress, I will do what is in my power to help you out of it, not being, however, prodigal of promises until I know the case, as a learned physician only gives advice when he has observed the diagnostics." "No one has anything to do with my affairs," said the poor lad, and folding his arms on the table, he laid his head upon them with the sullen dejection of the overburdened llama when it throws itself down to die in desperation. Richard Meniples, like most folk who have a good opinion of themselves, was fond of the task of consolation, which at once displayed his superiority, for the consoler is necessarily, for the time at least, superior to the afflicted person, and indulged his love of talking. He inflicted on the poor penitent a harangue of pitiless length, stuffed full of the usual topics of the mutability of human affairs, the eminent advantages of patience under affliction, the folly of grieving for what hath no remedy, the necessity of taking more care for the future, and some gentle rebukes on account of the past, which acid he threw in to assist in subduing the patient's obstinacy, as Hannibal used vinegar in cutting his way through rocks. It was not in human nature to endure this flood of commonplace eloquence in silence, and Jinvin, whether desirous of stopping the flow of words, crammed thus into his ear against the stomach of his sense, or whether confiding in Ritchie's protestations of friendship, which the wretched says Fielding are ever so ready to believe, or whether merely to give his sorrows vent in words, raised his head, and turning his red and swollen eyes to Ritchie, "Cock's bones, man, only hold thy tongue, and thou shalt know all about it. And then all I ask of thee is to shake hands and part. This Margaret Ramsay, you have seen her, man?" "Once," said Ritchie, "once at Master George Harriet's in Lombard Street. I was in the room when they dined." "Ay, you helped to shift their trenchers, I remember," said Jinvin. "Well, that same pretty girl, and I will uphold her, the prettiest betwixt Paul's and the bar, she is to be wedded to your Lord Glenvarloch, with a pestilence on him." "That is impossible," said Ritchie. "It is raving nonsense, man. They make April gowks of you cockneys every month in the year. The Lord Glenvarloch married the daughter of a Lunnon mechanic. I would as soon believe the great Prester John would marry the daughter of a Jew packman." "Hark ye, brother," said Jinvin, "I will allow no one to speak disregardfully of the city, for all I am in trouble." "I crave your pardon, man. I meant no offence," said Ritchie. "But as to the marriage, it is a thing simply impossible." "It is a thing that will take place, though, for the Duke and the Prince and all of them have a finger in it, and especially the old fool of a king that makes her out to be some great woman in her own country, as all the Scots pretend to be, you know." "Master Vistson, but that you are under affliction," said the consoler, offended on his part. "I would hear no national reflections." The afflicted youth apologized in his turns, but asserted it was true that the king said Peggy Ramsay was some far-off sort of noble woman, and that he had taken a great interest in the match, and had run about like an old gander, cackling about Peggy ever since he had seen her in hose and doublet. "And no wonder," added poor Vin, with a deep sigh. "This may be all true," said Ritchie, "though it sounds strange in my ears. But, man, you should not speak evil of dignities. Curse not the king, Jinkin, not even in thy bedchamber. Stone walls have ears. No one has a right to know better than I." "I do not curse the foolish old man," said Jinkin, "but I would have them carry things a peg lower. If they were to see on a plain field 30,000 such pikes as I have seen in the artillery gardens, it would not be their long-haired courtiers would help them, I trow." "Hout, hout, man," said Ritchie. "Mind where the Stuarts come frae, and never think they want spears or claymores either, but leaving sick matters whilk are perilous to speak on. I say once more, what is your concern in all this matter?" "What is it?" said Jinkin. "Why, have I not fixed on Peggy Ramsay to be my true love, from the day I came to her old father's shop? And have I not carried her pattens and her chopins for 3 years, and borne her prayer book to church, and brushed the cushion for her to kneel down upon? And did she ever say me nay?" I see no cause she had, said Richie, if the like of such small services were all that ye proffered. Ah, man, there are few, very few, either of fools or of wise men, can how to guide a woman. Why did I not serve her at the risk of my freedom, and very nigh at the risk of my neck? Did she not? No, it was not her neither, but that accursed beldam, whom she caused to work upon me, persuade me like a fool to turn myself into a waterman, to help my lord and a plague to him down to Scotland. And instead of going peaceably down to the ship at Gravesend, did not he rant and bully and show his pistols and make me land him at Greenwich, where he played some swaggering pranks that helped both him and me into the Tower? Ah, said Richie, throwing more than his usual wisdom into his looks, so you were the green-jacketed waterman that rowed Lord Glenvarloch down the river. The more fool I that did not souse him in the Thames, said Jenkin, and I was the lad who would not confess one word of who and what I was, though they threatened to make me hug the Duke of Exeter's daughter. What is she, man? Said Richie. She must be an ill-fashioned piece if you're so much afraid of her, and she come of such high kin. I mean the rack, man, said Jenkin. Where were you bred that never heard of the Duke of Exeter's daughter? But all the dukes and duchesses in England could have got nothing out of me, so the truth came out some other way, and I was set free. Home I ran, thinking myself one of the cleverest and happiest fellows in the world, and she wanted to pay me with money for all my true service, and she spoke so sweetly and so coldly at the same time. I wished myself in the deepest dungeon of the Tower. I wished they had racked me to death before I heard this Scottish man was to joust me out of my sweetheart. But are ye sure ye have lost her? Said Richie. It sounds strange in my ears that my Lord Glenvarloch should marry the daughter of a dealer, though there are uncouth marriages made in London, I'll allow that. Why, I tell you this lord was no sooner clear of the Tower than he and Master George Heriot comes to make proposals for her, with the king's assent and what not, and fine fair day prospects of court favour for this lord, for he hath not an acre of land. Well, and what said the old watchmaker, said Richie, was he not as might weel beseem him, ready to loop out of his skin case for very joy? He multiplied 6 figures progressively and reported the product, then gave his consent. And what did you do? I rushed into the streets, said the poor lad with a burning heart and a bloodshot eye. And where did I first find myself but with that beldam mother Subtlechop? And what did she propose to me but to take the road? Take the road, man? In what sense? Said Richie. Even as a clerk to St. Nicholas, as a highwayman, like Poins and Petto and the good fellows in the play, and who think you was to be my captain? For she had the whole out here, I could speak to her. I fancy she took silence for consent, and thought me damned too unutterably to have one thought left that savoured of redemption. Who was to be my captain but the knave that you saw me cudgel at the ordinary, when you waited on Lord Glenvarloch, a cowardly, sharking, thievish bully about town here, whom they call Culpepper. Culpepper? Humph! I know somewhat of that smake, said Richie. Can ye by ony chance where he may be heard of? Master Jenkin, ye wad do me a sincere service to tell me. Why, he lives something obscurely, answered the apprentice, on account of suspicion of some villainy. I believe that horrid murder in Whitefriars or some such matter. But I might have heard all about him from Dame Subtlechop, for she spoke of my meeting him at Enfield Chase with some other good fellows to do a robbery on one that goes northward with a store of treasure. And you did not agree to this fine project? Said Meniples. I cursed her for a hag and came away about my business, answered Jenkin. Ay, and what said she to that, man? That would startle her, said Richie. Not a whit. She laughed and said she was in jest, answered Jenkin. But I know the she-devil's jest from her earnest too well to be taken in that way. But she knows I would never betray her. Betray her, no, replied Richie. But are ye in any shape bound to this Berkey Peppercall, or Culpepper, or whatever they call him, that ye should let him do a robbery on the honest gentleman that is travelling to the north, and may be a kindly Scot for what we know? I going home with a load of English money, said Jenkin, but be he who he will, they may rob the whole world, and they list, for I am robbed and ruined. Richie filled his friend's cup up to the brim, and insisted that he should drink what he called clean cop out. This love, he said, is but a barrenly matter for a brisk young fellow like yourself, Master Jenkin. And if ye must needs have a whimsy, though I think it would be safer to venture on a staid womanly body, why here be as bonny lasses in London as this Peg Ramsay. You need not say deeply, for it is very true. There is as good fish in the sea as ever came out of it. Now wherefore should you, who are as brisk and trig a young fellow of your inches as the sun needs to shine on, wherefore need you sit moping this way and not try some bold way to better your fortune? I tell you, Master Meniples, said Jenkin, I'm as poor as any Scot among you. I've broke my indenture, and I think of running my country. A well a day, said Richie, but that mauna be, man. I can weel by sad experience that porteth takes away pith, and the man sits full still that has a rent in his breeks. But courage, man, you have served me heretofore, and I will serve you now. If you will but bring me to speech of this same captain, it will be the best day's work you ever did. I guess where you are, Master Richard, you would save your countryman's long purse, said Jenkin. I cannot see how that should advantage me, but I reck not if I should bear a hand. I hate that braggart, that bloody-minded, cowardly bully. If you can get me mounted, I care not if I show you where the dame told me I should meet him, but you must stand to the risk, for though he is a coward himself, I know he will have more than one stout fellow with him. We'll have a warrant man, said Ritchie, and the hue and cry to boot. We will have no such thing, said Jenkin. If I'm to go with you, I'm not the lad to betray any one to the Harmenbeck. You must do it by manhood if I'm to go with you. I'm sworn to Cutter's law, and will sell no man's blood. A wheel, said Ritchie, a wilful man must have his way. Ye must think that I was born and bred where cracked crowns were plentier than whole ones. Besides, I've two noble friends here, Master Lowestoft of the Temple, and his cousin, Master Ringwood, that would blithely be of so gallant a party. Lowestoft and Ringwood, said Jenkin, they are both brave gallants. They will be sure company. Know you where they are to be found? Ay, marry, do I, replied Ritchie. They are fast at the cards and dice till the small hours, I warrant them. They are gentlemen of trust and honour, said Jenkin, and if they advise it, I will try the adventure. Go, try if you can bring them hither, since you have so much to say with them. We must not be seen abroad together. I know not how it is. Master Meniples, continued he, as his countenance brightened up, and while in his turn he filled the cups, but I feel my heart something lighter since I have thought of this matter. Thus it is to have counsellors, Master Jenkins, said Ritchie, and truly, I hope to hear you say that your heart is as light as a lavrock's, and that before you are many days older. Never smile and shake your head, but mind what I tell you, and bide here in the meanwhile, till I go to seek these gallants. I warrant you cart ropes would not hold them back from such a ploy as I shall propose to them. End of chapter 35. Section 38 of The Fortunes of Nigel by Sir Walter Scott. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 36. The thieves have bound the true men. Now could thou and I rob the thieves and go merrily to London. Henry IV, Part 1. The sun was high upon the glades of Enfield Chase, and the deer with which it then abounded were seen sporting in picturesque groups among the ancient oaks of the forest, when a cavalier and a lady on foot, although in riding apparel, sauntered slowly up one of the long alleys which were cut through the park for the convenience of the hunters. Their only attendant was a page, who, riding a Spanish jennet, which seemed to bear a heavy cloak-bag, followed them at a respectful distance. The female, attired in all the fantastic finery of the period, with more than the usual quantity of bugles, flounces, and trimmings, and holding her fan of ostrich feathers in one hand, and her riding mask of black velvet in the other, seemed anxious, by all the little coquetry practised on such occasions, to secure the notice of her companion, who sometimes heard her prattle without seeming to attend to it, and at other times interrupted his train of graver reflections to reply to her. Nay, but my lord, you walk so fast you will leave me behind you. Nay, I will have hold of your arm, but how to manage with my mask and my fan? Why would you not let me bring my waiting gentlewoman to follow us and hold my things? But see, I will put my fan in my girdle so, and now that I have a hand to hold you with, you shall not run away from me. Come on, then, answered the gallant, and let us walk apace, since you would not be persuaded to stay with your gentlewoman, as you call her, and with the rest of the baggage. You may perhaps see that, though you will not like to see. She took hold of his arm accordingly, but as he continued to walk at the same pace, she shortly let go of her hold, exclaiming that he had hurt her hand. The cavalier stopped and looked at the pretty hand and arm, which she showed him with exclamations against his cruelty. I dare say, she said, baring her wrist and a part of her arm, it is all black and blue to the very elbow. I dare say you are a silly little fool, said the cavalier, carelessly kissing the aggrieved arm. It is only a pretty incarnate which sets off the blue veins. Nay, my lord, now it is you are silly, answered the dame, but I'm glad I can make you speak and laugh on any terms this morning. I'm sure if I did insist on following you into the forest, it was all for the sake of diverting you. I'm better company than your page, I trow. And now tell me these pretty things with horns, be they not dear? Even such they be, Nelly, answered her neglectful attendant. And what can the great folk do with so many of them, forsooth? They send them to the city, Nell, where wise men make venison pasties of their flesh, and wear their horns for trophies, answered Lord Dalgarno, whom our reader has already recognized. Nay, now you laugh at me, my lord, answered his companion, but I know all about venison, whatever you may think. I always tasted it once a year when we dined with Mr. Deputy, she continued sadly, as a sense of her degradation stole across a mind bewildered with vanity and folly, though he would not speak to me now if we met together in the narrowest lane in the ward. I warrant he would not, said Lord Dalgarno, because thou, Nell, wouldst dash him with a single look, for I trust thou hast more spirit than to throw away words on such a fellow as he. Who, I? Said Dame Nelly. Nay, I scorn the proud princox too much for that. Do you know, he made all the folk in the wards stand cap in hand to him. My poor old John Christie and all. Here her recollection began to overflow at her eyes. A plague in your whimpering, said Dalgarno, somewhat harshly. Nay, never look pale for the matter, Nell. I am not angry with you, you simple fool. But what would you have me think when you are eternally looking back upon your dungeon yonder by the river, which smelt of pitch and old cheese worse than a Welshman does of onions, and all this when I'm taking you down to a castle as fine as is in fairyland? Shall we be there tonight, my lord? Said Nelly, drying her tears. Tonight, Nelly? No, nor this night fortnight. Now the Lord be with us and keep us, but shall we not go by sea, my lord? I thought everybody came from Scotland by sea. I'm sure Lord Glenvarloch and Richie Maniples came up by sea. There is a wide difference between coming up and going down, Nelly, answered Lord Dalgarno. And so there is for certain, said his simple companion, but yet I think I heard people speaking of going down to Scotland by sea, as well as coming up. Are you well advised of the way? Do you think it possible we can go by land, my sweet lord? It is but trying, my sweet lady, said Lord Dalgarno. Men say England and Scotland are in the same island, so one may hope there may be some road betwixt them by land. I shall never be able to ride so far, said the lady. We will have your saddle stuffed softer, said the lord. I tell you that you shall mew your city slough and change from the caterpillar of a poultry lane into the butterfly of a prince's garden. You shall have as many tires as there are hours in the day, as many handmaidens as there are days in the week, as many menials as there are weeks in the year, and you shall ride a hunting and hawking with the lord, instead of waiting upon an old ship chandler who could do nothing but hawk and spit. Ay, but will you make me your lady? Said Dame Nelly. Ay, surely, what else? Replied the lord. My lady love. Ay, but I mean your lady wife, said Nelly. Truly, Nell, in that I cannot promise to oblige you. A lady wife, continued Dalgarno, is a very different thing from a lady love. I heard from Mrs. Subtlechop, whom you lodged me with since I left poor old John Christie, that Lord Glenvarloch is to marry David Ramsay, the clockmaker's daughter. There is much betwixt the cup and the lip, Nelly. I wear something about me may break the bands of that hopeful alliance before the day is much older, answered Lord Dalgarno. Well, but my father was as good a man as old Davy Ramsay, and as well to pass in the world, my lord, and therefore, why should you not marry me? You have done me harm enough, I trow. Wherefore should you not do me this justice? For two good reasons, Nelly. Fate put a husband on you, and the king passed a wife upon me, answered Lord Dalgarno. Ay, my lord, said Nelly, but they remain in England, and we go to Scotland. Thy argument is better than thou art aware of, said Lord Dalgarno. I've heard Scottish lawyers say the matrimonial tie may be unclasped in our happy country by the gentle hand of the ordinary course of law, whereas in England it can only be burst by an act of Parliament. Well, Nelly, we will look into that matter, and whether we get married again or no, we will at least do our best to get unmarried. Shall we indeed, my honey sweet lord? And then I will think less about John Christie, for he will marry again, I warrant you, for he is well to pass, and I would be glad to think he had somebody to take care of him, as I used to do, poor loving old man. He was a kind man, though he was a score of years older than I, and I hope and pray he will never let a young lord cross his honest threshold again. Here the dame was once more much inclined to give way to a passion of tears, but Lord Dalgarno conjured down the emotion by saying with some asperity, "I'm weary of these April passions, my pretty mistress, and I think you will do well to preserve your tears for some more pressing occasion. Who knows what turn of fortune may in a few minutes call for more of them than you can render." "Goodness, my lord, what mean you by such expressions? John Christie, the kind heart, used to keep no secrets from me, and I hope your lordship will not hide your counsel from me." "Sit down beside me on this bank," said the nobleman. "I'm bound to remain here for a short space, and if you can be but silent, I should like to spend a part of it in considering how far I can, on the present occasion, follow the respectable example which you recommend to me." The place at which he stopped was at that time little more than a mound, partly surrounded by a ditch from which it derived the name of Camlet Moat. A few hewn stones there were, which had escaped the fate of many others that had been used in building different lodges in the forest for the royal keepers. These vestiges, just sufficient to show that here in former times the hand of man had been, marked the ruins of the abode of a once illustrious but long forgotten family, the Mandevilles, Earls of Essex, to whom Enfield Chase and the extensive domains adjacent had belonged in elder days. A wild woodland prospect led the eye at various points through broad and seemingly interminable alleys, which, meeting at this point as at a common centre, diverged from each other as they receded, and had therefore been selected by Lord Dalgarno as the rendezvous for the combat which, through the medium of Richie Maniplies, he had offered to his injured friend Lord Glenvarloch. "He will surely come," he said to himself. "Cowardice was not wont to be his fault. At least he was bold enough in the part. Perhaps yonder churl may not have carried my message, but no, he is a sturdy knave, one of those who prize their master's honour above their life. Look to the palfrey, Luton, and see thou let him not loose, and cast thy falcon glance down every avenue to mark if any one comes. Buckingham has undergone my challenge, but the proud minion pleads the king's paltry commands for refusing to answer me. If I can baffle this Glenvarloch, or slay him, if I can spoil him of his honour or his life, I shall go down to Scotland with credit sufficient to gild over past mischances. I know, my dear countrymen, they never quarrel with any one who brings them home either gold or martial glory, much more if he has both gold and laurels." As he thus reflected and called to mind the disgrace which he had suffered, as well as the causes he imagined for hating Lord Glenvarloch, his countenance altered under the influence of his contending emotions, to the terror of Nelly, who, sitting unnoticed at his feet, and looking anxiously in his face, beheld the cheek kindle, the mouth become compressed, the eye dilated, and the whole countenance expressed the desperate and deadly resolution of one who awaits an instant and decisive encounter with a mortal enemy. The loneliness of the place, the scenery so different from that to which alone she had been accustomed, the dark and sombre air which crept so suddenly over the countenance of her seducer, his command imposing silence upon her, and the apparent strangeness of his conduct in idling away so much time without any obvious cause, when a journey of such length lay before them, brought strange thoughts into her weak brain. She had read of women seduced from their matrimonial duties by sorcerers allied to the hellish powers, nay, by the father of evil himself, who, after conveying his victim into some desert remote from humankind, exchanged the pleasing shape in which he gained her affections for all his natural horrors. She chased this wild idea away as it crowded itself upon her weak and bewildered imagination, yet she might have lived to see it realized allegorically, if not literally, for the accident which presently followed. The page, whose eyes were remarkably acute, at length called out to his master, pointing with his finger at the same time down one of the alleys, that horsemen were advancing in that direction. Lord Dalgarno started up, and shading his eyes with his hand, gazed eagerly down the alley, when at the same instant he received a shot, which, grazing his hand, passed right through his brain, and laid him a lifeless corpse at the feet, or rather across the lap, of the unfortunate victim of his profligacy. The countenance, whose varied expression she had been watching for the last 5 minutes, was convulsed for an instant, and then stiffened into rigidity for ever. 3 ruffians rushed from the brake from which the shot had been fired, ere the smoke was dispersed. One, with many imprecations, seized on the page, another on the female, upon whose cries he strove by the most violent threats to impose silence, whilst the third began to undo the burden from the page's horse, but an instant rescue prevented their availing themselves of the advantage they had obtained. It may easily be supposed that Richie Maniplies, having secured the assistance of the 2 Templars, ready enough to join in anything which promised a fray, with Jinvin to act as their guide, had set off gallantly mounted and well armed, under the belief that they would reach Camlet Moat before the robbers and apprehend them in the fact. They had not calculated that, according to the custom of robbers in other countries, but contrary to that of the English highwaymen of those days, they meant to ensure robbery by previous murder. An accident also happened to delay them a little while on the road. In riding through one of the glades of the forest, they found a man dismounted and sitting under a tree, groaning with such bitterness of spirit that Lowestoft could not forbear asking if he was hurt. In answer, he said he was an unhappy man, in pursuit of his wife, who had been carried off by a villain. And as he raised his countenance, the eyes of Ritchie, to his great astonishment, encountered the visage of John Christie. "For the Almighty's sake, help me, Master Meniples," he said. "I have learned my wife is but a short mile before, with that black villain, Lord Dalgarno." "Have him forward by all means," said Lowestoft, a second Orpheus seeking his Eurydice. "Have him forward. We will save Lord Dalgarno's purse and ease him of his mistress. Have him with us, were it but for the variety of the adventure. I owe his lordship a grudge for rooking me. We have 10 minutes good." But it is dangerous to calculate closely in matters of life and death. In all probability, the minute or two which was lost in mounting John Christie behind one of their party might have saved Lord Dalgarno from his fate. Thus his criminal armour became the indirect cause of his losing his life, and thus our pleasant vices have made the whips to scourge us. The riders arrived on the field at full gallop the moment after the shot was fired, and Ritchie, who had his own reasons for attaching himself to Culpeper, who was bustling to untie the portmanteau from the page's saddle, pushed against him with such violence as to overthrow him, his own horse at the same time stumbling and dismounting his rider, who was none of the first equestrians. The undaunted Ritchie immediately arose, however, and grappled with the ruffian with such good will that, though a strong fellow, and though a coward now rendered desperate, Meniples got him under, wrenched a long knife from his hand, and dealt him a desperate stab with his own weapon, and leaped on his feet, and as the wounded man struggled to follow his example, he struck him upon the head with the butt end of a musketoon, which last blow proved fatal. "Bravo, Ritchie!" cried Lowestoft, who had himself engaged at sword point with one of the ruffians, and soon put him to flight. "Bravo, why, man, there lies sin, struck down like an ox, and iniquity's throat cut like a calf." "I know not why you should upbraid me with my upbringing, Master Lowestoft," answered Ritchie with great composure, "but I can tell you the shambles is not a bad place for training one to this work." The other Templar now shouted loudly to them, "If ye be men, come hither. Here lies Lord Dalgarno murdered." Lowestoft and Ritchie ran to the spot, and the page took the opportunity, finding himself now neglected on all hands, to ride off in a different direction, and neither he nor the considerable sum with which his horse was burdened were ever heard of from that moment. The third ruffian had not waited the attack of the Templar and Genvin, the latter of whom had put down old Christie from behind him that he might ride the lighter, and the whole 5 now stood gazing with horror on the bloody corpse of the young nobleman, and the wild sorrow of the female, who tore her hair and shrieked in the most disconsolate manner, until her agony was at once checked, or rather received a new direction, by the sudden and unexpected appearance of her husband, who, fixing on her a cold and severe look, said in a tone suited to his manner, "Ay, woman, thou takest on sadly for the loss of thy paramour." Then, looking on the bloody corpse of him from whom he had received so deep an injury, he repeated the solemn words of Scripture, "Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, and I will repay it. I, whom thou hast injured, will be first to render thee the decent offices due to the dead." So saying, he covered the dead body with his cloak, and then, looking on it for a moment, seemed to reflect on what he had next to perform. As the eye of the injured man slowly passed from the body of the seducer to the partner and victim of his crime, who had sunk down to his feet, which he clasped without venturing to look up, his features, naturally coarse and saturnine, assumed a dignity of expression which overawed the young Templars, and repulsed the officious forwardness of Ritchie Meniples, who was at first eager to have thrust in his advice and opinion. "Kneel not to me, woman," he said, "but kneel to the God thou hast offended, more than thou couldst offend such another worm as thyself. How often have I told thee, when thou wert at the gayest and the lightest, that pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Vanity brought folly, and folly brought sin, and sin hath brought death, his original companion. Thou must needs leave duty and decency and domestic love, to revel it gaily with the wild and with the wicked, and there thou liest like a crushed worm, writhing beside the lifeless body of thy paramour. Thou hast done me much wrong, dishonoured me among friends, driven credit from my house and peace from my fireside, but thou wert my first and only love, and I will not see thee an utter castaway, if it lies with me to prevent it. Gentlemen, I render ye such thanks as a broken-hearted man can give. Richard, commend me to your honourable master. I added gall to the bitterness of his affliction, but I was deluded. Rise up, woman, and follow me." He raised her up by the arm, while with streaming eyes and bitter sobs she endeavoured to express her penitence. She kept her hands spread over her face, yet suffered him to lead her away, and it was only as they turned around a break, which concealed the scene they had left, that she turned back, and casting one wild and hurried glance towards the corpse of Dalgarno, uttered a shriek, and clinging to her husband's arm, exclaimed wildly, "Save me, save me, they have murdered him." Lowestoft was much moved by what he had witnessed, but he was ashamed, as a town gallant, of his own unfashionable emotion, and did a force to his feelings when he exclaimed, "I let them go, the kind-hearted, believing, forgiving husband, the liberal, accommodating spouse. Oh, what a generous creature is your true London husband! Horns hath he, but tame as a fatted ox, he goreth not. I should like to see her, when she hath exchanged her mask and riding beaver for her peaked hat and muffler. We will visit them at Paul's Wharf, coz it will be a convenient acquaintance." "You had better think of catching the gypsy thief, Luton," said Ritchie, "Meniples, for by my faith he is off with his master's baggage and the siller." A keeper, with his assistants, and several other persons, had now come to the spot and made hue and cry after Luton, but in vain. To their custody the Templars surrendered the dead bodies, and after going through some formal investigation, they returned with Richard and Vincent to London, where they received great applause for their gallantry. Vincent's errors were easily expiated, in consideration of his having been the means of breaking up this band of villains, and there is some reason to think that what would have diminished the credit of the action in other instances rather added to it in the actual circumstances, namely, that they came too late to save Lord Dalgarno. George Heriot, who suspected how matters stood with Vincent, requested and obtained permission from his master to send the poor young fellow on an important piece of business to Paris. We are unable to trace his fate farther, but believe it was prosperous, and that he entered into an advantageous partnership with his fellow apprentice upon old Davy Ramsay retiring from business in consequence of his daughter's marriage. That eminent antiquary, Dr. Dryasdust, is possessed of an antique watch with a silver dial plate, the mainspring being a piece of catgut instead of a chain, which bears the names of Vincent and Tunstall memory monitors. Master Lowestoft failed not to vindicate his character as a man of gaiety by inquiring after John Christie and Dame Nelly, but greatly to his surprise, indeed to his loss, for he had wagered 10 pieces that he would domesticate himself in the family, he found the goodwill, as it was called, of the shop was sold, the stock auctioned, and the late proprietor and his wife gone, no one knew whither. The prevailing belief was that they had emigrated to one of the new settlements in America. Lady Dalgarno received the news of her unworthy husband's death with a variety of emotions, among which horror that he should have been cut off in the middle career of his profligacy was the most prominent. The incident greatly deepened her melancholy and injured her health, already shaken by previous circumstances. Repossessed of her own fortune by her husband's death, she was anxious to do justice to Lord Glenvarloch by treating for the recovery of the mortgage. But the scrivener, having taken fright at the late events, had left the city and absconded, so that it was impossible to discover into whose hands the papers had now passed. Richard Meniples was silent for his own reasons. The Templars, who had witnessed the transaction, kept the secret at his request, and it was universally believed that the scrivener had carried off the writings along with him. We may here observe that fears similar to those of Skurlewitter freed London for ever from the presence of Dame Subtlechop, who ended her career in the Rasp House, viz. Bridewell of Amsterdam. The stout old Lord Huntingdon, with a haughty carriage and unmoistened eye, accompanied the funeral procession of his only son to its last abode, and perhaps the single tear which fell at length upon the coffin was given less to the fate of the individual than to the extinction of the last male of his ancient race. End of chapter 36. Section 39 of The Fortunes of Nigel by Sir Walter Scott. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 37. Jaques. There is, sui, another flood toward, and these couples are coming to the ark. Here comes a pair of very strange beasts. As you like it. The fashion of such narratives as the present changes like other earthly things. Time was that the tale-teller was obliged to wind up his story by a circumstantial description of the wedding, bedding, and throwing the stocking as the grand catastrophe to which, through so many circumstances of doubt and difficulty, he had at length happily conducted his hero and heroine. Not a circumstance was then omitted, from the manly ardour of the bridegroom and the modest blushes of the bride to the parson's new surplice and the silk tabinet mantua of the bridesmaid. But such descriptions are now discarded, for the same reason, I suppose, that public marriages are no longer fashionable, and that, instead of calling together their friends to a feast and a dance, the happy couple elope in a solitary post-chaise, as secretly as if they meant to go to Gretna Green or to do worse. I'm not ungrateful for a change, which saves an author the trouble of attempting in vain to give a new colour to the commonplace description of such matters, but notwithstanding I find myself forced upon it in the present instance, as circumstances sometimes compel a stranger to make use of an old road which has been for some time shut up. The experienced reader may have already remarked that the last chapter was employed in sweeping out of the way all the unnecessary and less interesting characters, that I might clear the floor for a blithe bridal. In truth, it would be unpardonable to pass over slightly what so deeply interested our principal personage, King James. That learned and good-humoured monarch made no great figure in the politics of Europe, but then, to make amends, he was prodigiously busy, when he could find a fair opportunity of intermeddling with the private affairs of his loving subjects, and the approaching marriage of Lord Glenvarloch was matter of great interest to him. He had been much struck, that is, for him who was not very accessible to such emotions, with the beauty and embarrassment of the pretty Peg Ramsay, as he called her, when he first saw her, and he glorified himself greatly on the acuteness which he had displayed in detecting her disguise, and in carrying through the whole inquiry which took place in consequence of it. He laboured for several weeks while the courtship was in progress, with his own royal eyes, so as well nigh to wear out, he declared, a pair of her father's best barnacles, in searching through old books and documents for the purpose of establishing the bride's pretensions to a noble though remote descent, and thereby remove the only objection which envy might conceive against the match. In his own opinion, at least, he was eminently successful, for when Sir Mungo Malagrother one day in the presence chamber took upon him to grieve bitterly for the bride's lack of pedigree, the monarch cut him short with, "Ye may save your grief for your ain next occasion, Sir Mungo, for by our royal Saul we will uphold her father Davy Ramsay to be a gentleman of 9 descents, wa's great gudesire came of the old martial stock of the house of Dalwolsey, than whom better men never did, and better never will, draw sword for king and country. Heard ye never of Sir William Ramsay of Dalwolsey, man, of whom John Fordoun saith, he was bellicosimus, noblissimus, his castle stands to witness for itself, not 3 miles from Dalkeith, man, and within a mile of Bannockrig. Davy Ramsay came of that old and honoured stock, and I trust he hath not derogated from his ancestors by his present craft. They all wrought with steel, man, only the old knights drilled holes with their swords in their enemies' corslets, and he saws nicks in his brass wheels. And I hope it is as honourable to give eyes to the blind as to slash them out of the head of those that see, and to show us how to value our time as it passes, as to fling it away in drinking, brawling, spear splintering, and such like unchristian doings. And you maun understand that Davy Ramsay is no mechanic, but follows a liberal art, which approacheth almost to the act of creating a living being, seeing it may be said of a watch, as Claudius saith of the sphere of Archimedes the Syracusan, inclusis varius formulatur spiritus astris et vivum caritas modibus ergit opus. Your Majesty had best give old Davy a coat of arms as well as a pedigree, said Sir Mungo. It's done, or ye bade, Sir Mungo, said the king, and I trust we, who are the fountain of all earthly honour, are free to spirit a few drops of it on one so near our person, without offence to the knight of Castle Girnigo. We have already spoken with the learned men of the Heralds' College, and we propose to grant him an augmented coat of arms, being his paternal coat, charged with the crown wheel of a watch in chief for a difference, and we propose to add time and eternity for supporters as soon as the Garter King-at-Arms shall be able to devise how eternity is to be represented. I would make him twice as muckle as time, said Archie Armstrong, the court fool, who chanced to be present when the king stated this dilemma. Peace, man, ye shall be whipped, said the king in return for this hint. And you, my liege subjects of England, may we'll take a hint from what we have said, and not be in such a hurry to laugh at our Scottish pedigrees, though they be somewhat long derived, and difficult to be deduced. Ye see that a man of right gentle blood may for a season lay by his gentry, and yet ken where to find it, when he has occasion for it. It would be as unseemly for a packman or pedlar, as ye call a travelling merchant, whilk is a trade to which our native subjects of Scotland are specially addicted, to be blazing his genealogy in the faces of those to whom he sells a bawbee's worth of ribbon, as it would be to him to have a beaver on his head and a rapier by his side, when the pack was on his shoulders. Na, he hings his sword on the cleek, lays his beaver on the shelf, puts his pedigree into his pocket, and gangs as doucely and cannily about his peddling craft as if his blood was nae better than ditch water. But let our pedlar be transformed, as I have kenned it happen mair than aince, into a bein' thriving merchant, then ye shall have a transformation, my lords. In nova fert animus mutatis ticuri formas. Out he pulls his pedigree, on he buckles his sword, gives his beaver a brush, and cocks it in the face of all creation. We mention these things at the mere length because we would have you all to know that it is not without due consideration of the circumstances of all parties that we design in a small and private way to honour with our own royal presence the marriage of Lord Glenvarloch with Margaret Ramsay, daughter and heiress of David Ramsay, our horologer, and a cadet only thrice removed from the ancient house of Dalwolsey. We are grieved we cannot have the presence of the noble chief of that house at the ceremony, but where there is honour to be won abroad, the Lord Dalwolsey is seldom to be found at home. Sic fuit est et erit. Jingling Geordie, as ye stand to the cost of the marriage feast, we look for good cheer. Harriet bowed, as in duty bound. In fact, the king, who was the great politician about trifles, had manoeuvred greatly on this occasion, and had contrived to get the prince and Buckingham dispatched on an expedition to Newmarket in order that he might find an opportunity in their absence of indulging himself in his own gossiping, coshering habits which were distasteful to Charles, whose temper inclined to formality, and with which even the favourite of late had not thought it worth while to seem to sympathize. When the levee was dismissed, Sir Mungo Malagrotha seized upon the worthy citizen in the courtyard of the palace, and detained him in spite of all his efforts for the purpose of subjecting him to the following scrutiny. This is a sair job on you, Master George. The king must have had little consideration. This will cost you a bonny penny, this wedding dinner. It will not break me, Sir Mungo, answered Harriet. The king hath a right to see the table which his bounty hath supplied for years, well covered for a single day. Very true, we'll have a to pay, I doubt less or mair. A sort of penny wedding it will prove, where all men contribute to the young folks' maintenance, that they may not have just 4 bare legs in a bed together. What do you propose to give, Master George? We begin with the city when money is in question. Only a trifle, Sir Mungo. I give my goddaughter the marriage ring. It is a curious jewel, but I bought it in Italy. It belonged to Cosmo de' Medici. The bride will not need my help. She has an estate which belonged to her maternal grandfather. The old soap boiler, said Sir Mungo. It will need some of his suds to scour the blot out of the Glenvarloch shield. I've heard that estate was no great things. It is as good as some posts at court, Sir Mungo, which are coveted by persons of high quality, replied George Harriet. Court favour, said he, court favour, Master Harriet, replied Sir Mungo, choosing then to use his malady of misapprehension. Moonshine and water, poor thing. If that is all she is to be tokered with, I'm truly solicitous about them. I will let you into a secret, said the citizen, which will relieve your tender anxiety. The Dowager Lady Dalgarno gives a competent fortune to the bride, and settles the rest of her estate upon her nephew, the bridegroom. Ay, say, said Sir Mungo, just to show her regard to her husband that is in the tomb. Lucky that her nephew did not send him there. It was a strange story, that death of poor Lord Dalgarno. Some folk think the poor gentleman had much wrong. Little good comes of marrying the daughter of the house you are at feud with. Indeed, it was less poor Dalgarno's fault than theirs that forced the match on him. But I'm glad the young folk are to have something to live on, come how it like, whether by charity or inheritance. But if the Lady Dalgarno were to sell all she has, even to her very wily coat, she canna gie them back the fair castle of Glenvarloch. That is lost in gain. It is but too true, said George Heriot, we cannot discover what has become of the villain Andrew Scurley-Witter, or what Lord Dalgarno has done with the mortgage. Assigned it away to someone, that his wife might not get it after he was gained. It would have disturbed him in his grave. To think Glenvarloch should get that land back again. Said Sir Mungo, depend on it, he will have taken sure measures to keep that noble lordship out of her grips, or her nevoys either. Indeed, it is but too probable, Sir Mungo, said Master Heriot. But as I am obliged to go and look after many things in consequence of this ceremony, I must leave you to comfort yourself with the reflection. The bride day, you say, is to be on the 30th of the instant month, said Sir Mungo, hallowing after the citizen. I will be with you in the hour of cause. The king invites the guests, said George Heriot, without turning back. The base-born, ill-bred mechanic, soliloquized Sir Mungo. If it were not the odd score of pounds he lent me last week, I would teach him how to bear himself to a man of quality. But I will be at the bridal banquet in spite of him. Sir Mungo contrived to get invited, or commanded to attend on the bridal accordingly, at which there were but few persons present, for James on such occasions preferred a snug privacy, which gave him liberty to lay aside the encumbrance, as he felt it to be, of his regal dignity. The company was very small, and indeed there were at least 2 persons absent whose presence might have been expected. The first of these was the Lady Dalgarno, the state of whose health, as well as the recent death of her husband, precluded her attendance on the ceremony. The other absentee was Richie Manipoles, whose conduct for some time past had been extremely mysterious, regulating his attendance on Lord Glenvarloch entirely according to his own will and pleasure. He had, ever since the rencontre in on-field chase, appeared regularly at his bedside in the morning to assist him to dress, and at his wardrobe in the evening. The rest of the day he disposed of at his own pleasure, without control from his lord, who had now a complete establishment of attendance. Yet he was somewhat curious to know how the fellow disposed of so much of his time, but on this subject Richie showed no desire to be communicative. On the morning of the bridal day, Richie was particularly attentive in doing all a valet de chambre could, so as to set off to advantage the very handsome figure of his master, and when he had arranged his dress to the utmost exactness, and put to his long curled locks what he called the finishing touch of the Reading cane, he gravely kneeled down, kissed his hand, and bade him farewell, saying that he humbly craved leave to discharge himself of his lordship's service. Why, what humour is this, said Lord Glenvarloch, if you mean to discharge yourself of my service, Richie, I suppose you intend to enter my wife's. I wish your good ladyship that shall soon be, and your good lordship, the blessings of as good a servant as myself, in heaven's good time, said Richie, but fate hath so ordained it that I can henceforth only be your servant in the way of friendly courtesy. Well, Richie, said the young lord, if you are tired of service, we will seek some better provision for you, but you will wait on me to the church and partake of the bridal dinner. Under favour, my lord, answered Richie, I must remind you of our covenant. Having presently some pressing business of my own, Wilk will detain me during the ceremony, but I will not fail to pry Master George's good cheer in respect he has made very costly fare. Wilk it would be unthankful not to partake of. Do as you list, answered Lord Glenvarloch, and having bestowed a passing thought on the whimsical and pragmatical disposition of his follower, he dismissed the subject for others better suited to the day. The reader must fancy the scattered flowers which strewed the path of the happy couple to church, the loud music which accompanied the procession, the marriage service performed by a bishop, the king who met them at St. Paul's giving away the bride, to the great relief of her father, who had thus time during the ceremony to calculate the just quotient to be laid on the pinion of report in a timepiece which he was then putting together. When the ceremony was finished, the company were transported in the royal carriages to George Heriot's, where a splendid collation was provided for the marriage guests in the fold-jam apartments. The king no sooner found himself in this snug retreat than, casting from him his sword and belt with such haste as if they burnt his fingers, and flinging his plumed hat on the table, as who should say lie their authority, he swallowed a hearty cup of wine to the happiness of the married couple, and began to amble about the room, mumping, laughing, and cracking jests, neither the wittiest nor the most delicate, but accompanied and applauded by shouts of his own mirth, in order to encourage that of the company. Whilst his majesty was in the midst of this gay humour, and a call to the banquet was anxiously expected, a servant whispered Master Heriot forth of the apartment. When he re-entered, he walked up to the king, and in his turn whispered something at which James started. He is not wanting his siller, said the king, shortly and sharply. By no means, my liege, answered Heriot. It is a subject he states himself as quite indifferent about, so long as it can pleasure your majesty. Body of us, man, said the king, it is the speech of a true man and a loving subject, and we will grace him accordingly. What though he be but a carle? A twopenny cat may look at a king. Swithman, have him. Pundite forest. Maniples, they should have called the Shield Moneypennies, though I sall warrant you English think we have not such a name in Scotland. It is an ancient and honourable stock, the Moneypennies, said Sir Mungo Malagrother. The only loss is there are, say, few of the name. The family seems to increase among your countrymen, Sir Mungo, said Master Lowestoft, whom Lord Glenvarloch had invited to be present, since his Majesty's happy accession brought so many of you here. Right, sir, right, said Sir Mungo, nodding and looking at George Heriot. There have some of ourselves been the better of that great blessing to the English nation. As he spoke, the door flew open, and in entered, to the astonishment of Lord Glenvarloch, his late serving man Richie Maniples, now sumptuously, nay gorgeously attired in a superb brocaded suit, and leading in his hand the tall, thin, withered, somewhat distorted form of Martha Trapboys, arrayed in a complete dress of black velvet, which suited so strangely with the pallid and severe melancholy of her countenance that the king himself exclaimed in some perturbation, "What the deil has the fellow brought us here? Body of our regal selves, it is a corpse that has run off with the mort-cloth." "May I supplicate your majesty to be gracious unto her," said Richie, "being that she is in respect of this morning's wark, my ain wedded wife, Mrs. Martha Maniples by name." "Soul of our body, man, but she looks wondrous grim," answered King James. "Art thou sure she has not been in her time maid of honour to Queen Mary, our kinswoman of red-hot memory?" "I am sure, and it like your majesty, that she has brought me 50,000 pounds of good siller and better, and that has enabled me to pleasure your majesty and other folk." "Ye need have said naething about that, man," said the king. "We ken our obligations in that sma matter, and we are glad this Brutus spouse of thine hath bestowed her treasure on ane wha kens to put it to the profit of his king and country. But how the deal did you come by her, man?" "In the old Scottish fashion, my liege. She is the captive of my bow and my spear," answered Maniples. "There was a convention that she should wed me when I avenged her father's death, so I slew and took possession." "It is the daughter of old Trapboys, who has been missed so long," said Lowestoft. "Where the devil could you mew her up so closely, friend Richie?" "Master Richard, if it be your will," answered Richie, "or Master Richard Maniples, if you like it better. For mewing of her up, I found her a shelter in all honour and safety under the roof of an honest countryman of my own, and for secrecy was a point of prudence when wantons like you were abroad, Master Lowestoft." There was a laugh at Richie's magnanimous reply, on the part of every one but his bride, who made to him a signal of impatience, and said, with her usual brevity and sternness, "Peace, peace, I pray you peace, let us do that which we came for." So saying, she took out a bundle of parchments, and delivering them to Lord Glenvarloch, she said aloud, "I take this royal presence, and all here to witness that I restore the ransomed lordship of Glenvarloch to the right owner, as free as ever it was held by any of his ancestors." "I witnessed the redemption of the mortgage," said Lowestoft, "but I little dreamt by whom it had been redeemed." "No need ye should," said Richie. "There would have been small wisdom in crying roast meat." "Peace," said his bride once more. "This paper," she continued, delivering another to Lord Glenvarloch, "is also your property. Take it, but spare me the question how it came into my custody." The king had bustled forward beside Lord Glenvarloch, and fixing an eager eye on the writing, exclaimed, "Body of ourselves, it is our royal sign manual for the money which was so long out of sight. How came you by Mistress Bride?" "It is a secret," said Martha dryly. "A secret which my tongue shall never utter," said Richie resolutely, "unless the king commands me on my allegiance." I do command you," said James, trembling and stammering with the impatient curiosity of a gossip, while Sir Mungo, with more malicious anxiety to get at the bottom of the mystery, stooped his long thin form forward like a bent fishing rod, raised his thin grey locks from his ear, and curved his hand behind it to collect every vibration of the expected intelligence. Martha in the meantime frowned most ominously on Richie, who went on undauntedly to inform the king that his deceased father-in-law, a good careful man in the main, had a touch of worldly wisdom about him that at times marred the uprightness of his walk. He liked to dabble among his neighbours' gear, and some of it would at times stick to his fingers in the handling. "For shame, man, for shame," said Martha, "since the infamy of the deed must be told, be it at least briefly. Yes, my lord," she added, addressing Glenvarloch, "the piece of gold was not the sole bait which brought the miserable old man to your chamber that dreadful night. His object, and he accomplished it, was to purloin this paper. The wretched scrivener was with him that morning, and I doubt not urged the doting old man to this villainy to offer another bar to the ransom of your estate. If there was a yet more powerful agent at the bottom of this conspiracy, God forgive it to him at this moment, for he is now where the crime must be answered." "Amen," said Lord Glenvarloch, and it was echoed by all present. "For my father," continued she, with her stern features twitched by an involuntary and convulsive movement. His guilt and folly cost him his life, and my belief is constant that the wretch who counselled him that morning to purloin the paper left open the window for the entrance of the murderers. Everybody was silent for an instant. The king was first to speak, commanding search instantly to be made for the guilty scrivener. I, lictor, he concluded, collega manus, capit obnupido, infelici suspenditi arbori. Lowestoft answered with due respect that the scrivener had absconded at the time of Lord Dalgarno's murder, and had not been heard of since. Let him be sought for, said the king. And now let us change the discourse. These stories make one's very blood grow, and are altogether unfit for bridal festivity. Hymen, O Hymene, added he, snapping his fingers, Lord Glenvarloch, what say you to Mistress Menippeles, this bonny bride that has brought you back your father's estate on your bridal day? Let him say nothing, my liege, said Martha, that will best suit his feelings and mine. There is redemption money at the least to be repaid, said Lord Glenvarloch, in that I cannot remain debtor. We will speak of it hereafter, said Martha. My debtor you cannot be, and she shut her mouth as if determined to say nothing more on the subject. Sir Mungo, however, resolved not to part with the topic, and availing himself of the freedom of the moment, said to Richie, a queer story, that of your father-in-law, honest man. Methinks your bride thanked you little for ripping it up. I make it a rule, Sir Mungo, replied Richie, always to speak any evil I know about my family myself, having observed that if I do not, it is sure to be told by ither folks. But Richie, said Sir Mungo, it seems to me that this bride of yours is like to be master and mare in the conjugal state. If she abides my word, Sir Mungo, answered Richie, I thank heaven I can be as deaf as any one, and if she comes to dunce, I have twa hands to pake her with. Weel, said Richie again, said the king, you have gotten it on baith haffets, Sir Mungo, troth. Mistress bride for a fool, your good man has a pretty turn of wit. There are fools, sire, replied she, who have wit, and fools who have courage, ay, and fools who have learning, and are great fools with notwithstanding. I chose this man because he was my protector when I was desolate, and neither for his wit nor his wisdom. He is truly honest, and has a heart and hand that make amends for some folly. Since I was condemned to seek a protector through the world, which is to me a wilderness, I may thank God that I have come by no worse. And that is say, sensibly said, replied the king, that by my Saul, I'll try whether I cannot make him better. Kneel down, Richie, somebody lend me a rapier. Yours, Mr. Langstaff, that's a brave name for a lawyer. Ye need not flash it out that gay Templar fashion, as if ye were about to pink a bailiff. He took the drawn sword, and with averted eyes, for it was a sight he loved not to look on, endeavoured to lay it on Richie's shoulder, but nearly stuck it into his eye. Richie, starting back, attempted to rise, but was held down by Lowestoft, while Sir Mungo, guiding the royal weapon, the honour-bestowing blow was given and received. Sergei Carnifex, rise up, Sir Richard Menippeles of Castle Collet, and my lords and lieges, let us all to our dinner, for the kakaliki is cooling. End of chapter 37. End of Fortunes of Nigel by Sir Walter Scott.